The storm that broke him open, a widower, a 6-year-old, and the stranger he almost left outside his door. The thermometer on the kitchen wall read -19. The power had been dead for 6 hours. Adrian Cole held his 6-year-old son against his chest and felt the boy's lips, blue and cracking, brush against his neck. Outside, the blizzard screamed against the windows like something alive and hungry. And in the freezing hallway stood the woman he had barely spoken to in 4 months. The tenant renting his spare room, wrapped in a blanket, watching his son turn the color of winter. Adrian had one decision left to make, and he was already too late to make it well. If this story reaches your heart the way it reached mine while I was writing it, please take 1 second to hit the like button and drop the name of the city where you're watching from in the comments. I read every single one, and it helps me see how far this little story has traveled. Now let's begin. The first thing that went was the porch light. Adrian noticed it the way a man notices most things after 3 years of widowerhood. Late, and only because his son pointed it out. Mason was kneeling on the living room couch with his face pressed to the glass, tracing circles in the fog his breath left behind. The boy had been doing that for 20 minutes, narrating the storm the way 6-year-olds narrate everything, as if the weather needed a witness. Dad? Dad? The light went. Adrian looked up from the kitchen counter where he was trying to get a lid to seat properly on a Tupperware of leftover chili. The lid was warped. The Tupperware was warped. Everything in this house was warped in some small way, including him. What light, bud? The porch one, the yellow one. It went black. Adrian set the container down and walked to the window. Outside, the world had turned into something out of a bad dream. The snow wasn't falling so much as attacking, coming sideways, coming in sheets, coming like it had a personal grievance with Culver's Ridge, Iowa. He couldn't see the Tahoe in the driveway. He couldn't see the driveway. He couldn't see the mailbox he had hit with his own truck 2 Christmases ago and never gotten around to fixing. The porch light, yes, out. Probably a bulb, Mace. It was fine yesterday. Bulbs go. But even as he said it, the kitchen light behind him flickered, hummed, and then, with a small apologetic click, died. The fridge stopped its low chewing sound. The furnace, which had been running hard for 2 days, gave a long exhale and quit. The house went quiet in a way houses aren't supposed to be quiet. Dad? Yeah, I see. Dad, the TV? I see, bud. Adrian stood there for a second with his hand on the windowsill, doing the small math every parent does in small emergencies. Power's out. Storm's bad. Could be 15 minutes, could be 15 hours. He'd grown up here. He knew how Iowa winters behaved, and how they misbehaved. This one, the one they'd been calling Ellis on the news, was misbehaving. He walked to the hallway closet and pulled the string for the bare bulb. Nothing, of course. He felt around on the top shelf for the flashlight and found, instead, a tennis ball, a roll of duct tape, and a small plastic pony that had once belonged to Mason's mother when she was a girl. She had kept it her whole life. Adrian's fingers closed around it automatically, the way his fingers had been closing around her things automatically for 3 years. And he had to take a breath he didn't want to take before he could put the pony back and keep looking, the flashlight when he found it was dead. Of course, he muttered. What, Dad? Nothing, bud. Hang on. He walked back into the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, pushed aside the birthday candles and the takeout menus and the permission slips he had meant to sign, and came up with a pack of AA batteries. He changed them out, clicked the flashlight on. A weak orange beam sputtered across the linoleum. Okay, Isaki, he said, more to himself than to Mason. Okay, we're fine. He wasn't fine. He hadn't been fine in a long time. But he was the father, and the father says, okay, we're fine, and the 6-year-old believes it, and that's the deal. Upstairs, a door opened. Adrian heard it the way he heard everything Lila did, peripherally, like weather in another county. A soft click of a latch. A pause. The creak of the floorboard at the top of the stairs, the one he kept meaning to screw down. Mr. Cole? Her voice was quiet. It was always quiet. 4 months she had lived in his spare room, and he could count the full conversations they'd had on one hand with fingers left over. Power's out, he called back, not looking up. I know, my phone... She paused. My phone has no service either. Tower's probably down, lines get iced over, they snap. Is your son okay? That was the thing she did that he couldn't figure out. She never asked how he was. She always asked about Mason. And something about it, the way she pronounced your son instead of using the boy's name, like she hadn't earned his name yet, used to irritate Adrian in a low background way. Tonight, for some reason, it didn't. He's fine. Come down if you want. It's warmer down here for now. He heard her hesitate on the stairs. 4 months of hesitating on those stairs. Adrian had met Lila Bennett in August, when his sister had called him and told him in that tone sisters use that she'd found him a renter and he was going to say yes. Don't be an ass about it, Aid. She's quiet. She pays cash. She works nights at the diner. You won't even know she's there. And he mostly hadn't. She ate cereal over the sink when he wasn't home. She left for her shift at 4 in the afternoon and came back at 2 in the morning, boots in her hand, tiptoeing. She paid rent in envelopes pushed under his bedroom door on the 1st of every month. Cash, like his sister said. Always the exact amount, never a note. He knew she was 26. He knew she came from somewhere in Missouri she didn't like to name. He knew she had a scar on the back of her left hand shaped like a comma, and that once, in the summer, she had come down to the kitchen at midnight thinking he wasn't home, and he had been sitting in the dark, and she had startled so badly she had dropped a glass of water. She had apologized 12 times. He had counted. That was about the extent of what he knew about the woman now coming down his stairs in the dark. She appeared in the kitchen doorway holding her own flashlight, which was nicer than his. She was wearing sweatpants and 2 sweatshirts, one on top of the other, and her hair, which he had only ever seen pulled back for her diner shifts, was down around her shoulders in a way that made her look younger and somehow tireder. "Hi, Mason," she said. "Hi," Mason said back from the couch. The power died. "I noticed. My dad's gonna fix it." Adrian made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Your dad can't fix the weather, bud. You fix everything." "Not everything." He meant it to sound light. It came out heavier than he wanted. He saw Lila glance at him in the flashlight beam and then glance away. Fast. The way she always glanced away. Like eye contact was a room she didn't have a key to. "I have a camping stove," she said. Adrian turned. "What?" "In my room. A camping stove. It's the small kind, the single burner. And 2 propane canisters. She stopped. "I don't know if that helps. I just thought I'd say." He stared at her for a second. 4 months, and he hadn't known she owned a camping stove. 4 months, and it had never occurred to him to ask what she had in that room upstairs. He had treated her door like it was a sealed container. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that helps." By 8 o'clock, the temperature in the house had dropped 10 degrees. Adrian knew because the thermostat still had a battery in it, even if the furnace it controlled was as dead as the porch light. He stood in the hallway with the flashlight aimed at the little digital screen and watched the number tick down from 63 to 62 to 61, while he counted in his head how many blankets they had and how many of those blankets were worth a damn. Mason had fallen asleep on the couch under the good Afghan, the one Adrian's mother had crocheted before she died, which was the only item in the house Adrian had washed and put away 3 times, and then stopped washing because he was afraid he would ruin it. In the kitchen, Lila had set up the camping stove on the counter and was melting snow from a bowl on the back steps so they would have drinkable water if the pipes went. She worked fast and didn't talk. Adrian noticed, again, peripherally, that she knew what she was doing. "You've done this before," he said. She didn't look up. "Once or twice?" "Where?" "Around?" He let it go. He was too tired to fish. He walked into the living room and stood over his son for a long minute, watching the boy's chest rise and fall under the Afghan. Mason slept the way he did everything, hard with his whole self. One little fist was curled up against his cheek. A line of drool had made its way down to the pillow. He looked so much like his mother in that moment that Adrian had to close his eyes. "Don't," he told himself. "Not tonight. Not while she's in the kitchen. Not while the house is falling apart." When he opened his eyes again, Lila was standing in the doorway with 2 mugs. "Hot water," she said. "I didn't know if you wanted tea. I didn't want to assume." "Water's fine." She handed him the mug. Their fingers didn't touch. She was careful about that. He had noticed her being careful about that for 4 months and had never once thought about why. "Mr. Cole?" "Adrian." She blinked. "What?" Adrian, you've lived here 4 months. You can call me Adrian. Oh. She looked at the mug in her hand like it might have an opinion on this. Okay. You were going to say something. She glanced at Mason. I was going to say I don't think it's going to come back. The power. I heard on my radio before it died. They said the substation on the west side went down, and there's a second storm behind this one. They're telling people in Culver's Ridge to shelter in place, all night, maybe longer. Adrian took a slow breath. Yeah. You knew? I guessed. Why didn't you say? He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time since she'd moved in. Her face in the flashlight beam was thinner than he remembered. There were pale circles under her eyes that had been there a long time, maybe longer than 4 months. Because I didn't want him to hear, he said, nodding at Mason. And because saying it out loud makes it real, and I was trying to put that off for another hour. She nodded slowly like that was a thing she understood too well. I won't say it in front of him, she said. Thanks. They stood there a moment longer in the dark hallway, both of them holding mugs that were losing heat by the second. Adrian, she tried the name out. It didn't quite fit her mouth yet. There's something else. What? The pipes. The water stopped running about 20 minutes ago in my sink. I think they're already freezing on the north wall. Adrian set his mug down on the little table in the hall, the one with the scratched top where Mason had once tried to carve his name with a butter knife. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll go look. I'll help. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He looked at her for a second. She looked back at him, and this time she didn't glance away, and he wasn't sure what to do with that. Fine, he said. The north side of this house had always been the cold side. That was how it was built, the way old Iowa farmhouses were built, back against the prevailing wind, the tight side to the weather. Adrian's grandfather had built it in 1961 with his 2 brothers and a borrowed cement mixer, and Adrian had grown up in the bedroom on the south side, where the morning sun came in and the floor was never cold. The north side had the pantry, the mudroom, and the bathroom with the clawfoot tub his wife had loved. Adrian hadn't gone into that bathroom in 3 years unless he absolutely had to. Tonight, with Lila behind him holding the flashlight, he had to. The door resisted him when he pushed it. The air inside was 10 degrees colder than the hallway. He could see his breath hanging in the beam of light. Oh, Lila said softly. A thin sheen of ice had already formed on the inside of the window above the tub. The faucet on the sink had a small bead of water frozen at its tip, like a bead of sweat caught mid-drop. The pipe under the sink, the exposed one that ran along the baseboard, was furred with white frost. Yeah, Adrian said. Yeah, that's not good. Can we wrap it? I have old towels. Towels won't stop it freezing. They might slow it. Slower is better than now. He looked at her in the flashlight spill. Yeah, he said. Okay, go get them. She went. He crouched by the pipe and put his bare hand against it and pulled it away fast. It was cold enough to burn. In the back of his mind, under the emergency, under the exhaustion, a small voice said the pipes are going to go, and when they go, the whole north wall is going to be underwater, and you can't fix that without a plumber, and you can't get a plumber in a blizzard, and you... He stopped the voice. One thing at a time. That was the only way he had made it through 3 years, and it was the only way he was going to make it through tonight. Lila came back with an armload of towels, and behind her, a small shape in pajamas. Dad? Maze, buddy, why are you up? I heard you. I got cold. Adrian stood up. His knees popped. He took Mason's hand and felt, with a little jolt, how cold the boy's fingers already were. How long have you been cold, bud? I don't know. A while. Why didn't you say? You were busy. Something in Adrian's chest did a hard, ugly thing. You were busy. 6 years old, and he already knew not to interrupt his father when his father was busy. Jesus, what was he doing? Come here. He picked the boy up. Mason weighed almost nothing. Adrian pressed him against his own chest and felt the boy's hands find their way inside his flannel, like small cold animals looking for a den. Lila was watching them. Her face in the flashlight was doing something Adrian couldn't read. Adrian, she said. Yeah. Which room is warmest? He thought about it. The living room was biggest, which meant it was hardest to heat. The kitchen had the stove, but also had the largest window. His own bedroom on the south side was mine, he said. South side, small window. It'll hold heat longer than anywhere else in the house. She nodded. She didn't say anything else. She didn't have to. And there it was, the decision he had been avoiding for the last hour without even knowing he was avoiding it. He was going to have to put his dead wife's tenant, this quiet stranger who paid rent in envelopes and ate cereal over the sink, into the bedroom where his wife had slept, where his wife had died loving him, where he had not let another adult set foot in 3 years, because the alternative was letting his son freeze. Go get your stuff, he said to Lila. Anything warm, blankets, coats, all of it. Bring the stove. We'll set it up in the doorway so we can vent it. Adrian, I know what you're going to say. Don't say it. Just go. She went. Eat. He carried Mason down the hallway and into the bedroom he had shared with Kate. Nothing had moved in 3 years. Her robe was still on the hook on the back of the door. Her hairbrush was still on the dresser, tangled with a few of her honey-colored hairs that he was too much of a coward to pull out and throw away. Her side of the bed was still made with the hospital corners she had been so proud of, and his side was still a mess of unwashed sheets he changed only when Mason complained about the smell. He set Mason down on the bed. On Kate's side, he realized, because Mason always climbed onto Kate's side out of old habit and pulled the comforter up around the boy's shoulders. Dad. Yeah, bud. Is the lady going to come in here? Yeah. In Mom's room? Adrian's throat closed. Yeah, Mace. Okay. That was it. That was the whole objection. Okay. 6 years old and he could do what his father couldn't. He could let someone in. Adrian sat down heavily on the edge of the bed and rubbed a hand down his face. Behind him, from the doorway, Lila cleared her throat. He hadn't heard her come back. I can sleep in the hallway, she said. If that's better. You'd freeze. I've been cold before. Not like this. She didn't argue. She came in, slowly, carrying an armload of blankets and her little camping stove in a tote bag. She looked around the room, the robe, the hairbrush, the untouched hospital corners, and she didn't say anything about any of it, and Adrian was grateful in a way he didn't know how to name. Where do you want the stove? She asked. Doorway. Crack the window 2 inches so we don't poison ourselves. Okay. She worked. He watched. And when she crouched to light the little burner, and her hair fell forward over her face, and her hands shook slightly in the cold. Not from fear, he realized, but from being as tired and as cold as he was. Adrian understood something he had been refusing to understand for 4 months. She wasn't a guest in his house. She was a person in his house. And he had been treating her like a ghost because he already had one. And he didn't have the room for another. The stove threw off the small blue circle of warmth, not enough to heat the room, but enough to keep it from getting worse. Lila set a pot of snow on top of it to keep melting water coming. She moved around the small space carefully, like she was afraid of bumping into Kate's things. Adrian lay on the bed on his side, curled around Mason, who had fallen asleep again almost immediately. The boy was warmer now. His lips had gone back to the right color. Adrian kept one hand on his son's back, feeling the small even rise and fall, and with the other hand he pulled the spare blanket over Lila, where she sat on the floor against the wall with her knees pulled up. You can have the chair, he said quietly. The floor's fine. The chair's better than the floor. The chair is your wife's chair. She said it matter-of-factly, not as a judgment, not as a question. She had noticed. Of course she had noticed. The chair in the corner still had Kate's paperback on the seat, splayed open to the page she had been on the day she left for the store and never came back. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, it is. I'll stay on the floor. He watched her in the blue light of the camp stove. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the floor between her feet. Lila. Yeah? How long have you known she was dead? A pause. Since the day your sister showed me the room. She told you? Not directly. She said the previous owner of the chair didn't use it anymore. I figured out the rest. You never said anything. It wasn't mine to say anything about. He let that sit. Outside the cracked window, the wind had found a new pitch, higher, thinner, the kind of wind that sounded like it was trying to get inside. The house groaned somewhere in its bones. A pipe, far away, made a sound like a knuckle cracking. Lila. Yeah. Thank you. For the stove. You're welcome. And for not... He stopped. For not making this weird. Being in here. She turned her head then, finally, and looked at him across the blue light. Her eyes were dark and tired, and he realized, not afraid. She should have been afraid. He was a man she barely knew, and she was sleeping on the floor of his bedroom in a blizzard, and she wasn't afraid of him. That was a kind of trust he hadn't earned. It's already weird, she said. I just didn't want to make it worse. He huffed a laugh he didn't mean to huff. Yeah, fair. She looked back at the floor. Adrian, yeah? Can I ask you something? You can ask. What was her name? Nobody had asked him that in a long time. People in Culver's Ridge knew. They didn't need to ask. They stopped him at the feed store and in the post office and in the produce aisle and said, I was so sorry about Kate. And he said thank you, and they moved on, and her name was something that got said at him, not with him. Nobody had asked him her name in maybe 2 years. Kate, he said. Catherine. But she went by Kate. Kate. Yeah. Mason has her eyes. He almost couldn't breathe for a second. How did you know that? There's a picture on the fridge, the one from the pumpkin patch. His eyes are her eyes. Yeah, Adrian said, and his voice was not steady. Yeah, they are. Silence. The wind. The stove. I'm sorry, Lila said. About her. Thanks. And I'm sorry I'm in her room. Don't be. I asked you to come in. She would have asked you to come in. It's the kind of thing she did. He didn't know why he said that. He hadn't talked about Kate in the present tense. She would, in 3 years. It came out of his mouth before he could stop it, and once it was out, he realized it wasn't a betrayal. It was true. Kate would have walked out in the blizzard herself and dragged a half-dead stranger inside by the collar. Kate had been like that. Kate had been warm in a way Adrian had never known how to be. He felt, for no good reason, the hot sting of tears behind his eyes. He pressed his face into the top of Mason's head so Lila wouldn't see. She didn't say anything. She had the grace, at least, not to say anything. Well, they didn't sleep. Not really. They dozed in small broken pieces, the way people doze in disasters, surfacing every time the wind changed or the house made a new sound. Around 2 a.m, the pipe in the bathroom finally went. They heard it, a sharp crack, like a gunshot in a closed room. And then a long, slow hiss that turned into a trickle that turned into something worse. I'll go, Lila said, already standing. No, you stay with him. I'll find the shutoff. It's in the basement. You don't know where... I'll find it. Tell me where. He told her. She went. He heard her footsteps on the stairs, and then on the basement stairs, and then the long silence of someone feeling their way through a dark house by flashlight, and then, finally, the small, satisfying clunk of a valve turning and the hiss downstairs stopping. She came back up with her hair damp and her sleeves soaked to the elbow, and her hands shaking so hard she couldn't work the buttons on her sweatshirt. Hey, come here! Adrian swung his legs off the bed, careful not to wake Mason. He took her hands and rubbed them between his own. Her fingers were so cold they didn't feel like fingers. They felt like something he'd pulled out of a freezer. You're soaked. Some of it sprayed. Take the sweatshirt off. Take it off. I'll give you one of mine. You'll freeze. She hesitated. Then she peeled off the outer sweatshirt. Underneath, the second one was dry. He handed her the flannel he'd been wearing over his undershirt, and she pulled it on over the dry sweatshirt, and it swallowed her. And for a second she looked so small in his flannel that something in him twisted that he didn't want to examine. Sit down, he said. By the stove. Get the blood back. She sat. She was still shaking. Adrian? Yeah. I want you to know I'm not trying to... I know. You don't know what I was going to say. I do. She looked up at him. Her hair was dripping onto his flannel. Her eyes were huge in the blue light. Okay, she said quietly. Then you know. He sat back down on the edge of the bed next to Mason. He looked at her across the tiny blue circle of the stove. He thought about how 4 months ago she had been nothing to him. and how 3 hours ago she had been barely something, and how now, at 2 in the morning, with a broken pipe somewhere in the dark, and his son breathing evenly under his hand, she was the only other conscious adult in the world, as far as he could tell. He said, "Why did you come here, Lila?" She didn't answer right away. "Your sister needed a tenant," she said, "and I needed a town that wasn't the one I was in." "That's not an answer." "That's the one I have." He watched her. "My mom died when I was 22, she said, so quietly he almost missed it. "I was in school. I was going to be a nurse. She got sick, and then she got sicker, and then she was gone, and I didn't go back to school, and I didn't go home, and I didn't do any of the things I was supposed to do. I just stopped. I worked at a bar, then I worked at a diner, then I worked at another diner. Then your sister found me at the diner here and said there was a room, and I said, okay." "Lila, I'm not telling you that because I want you to feel bad for me. I'm telling you because you asked, and I owe you an answer. I've been running for 4 years, and your house is where I stopped. I don't know why it was yours, it just was." Adrian was quiet a long time. "I had a fight with her," he said finally. Lila looked up. "With Kate?" The morning of the accident. "We had a stupid fight about nothing, about whether Mason was old enough to have a phone for emergencies. I said no. She said yes. She said I was being paranoid. I said she was being reckless. She left the house mad. She went to the store mad. The roads were bad, and she was mad, and a truck hit her on the county road, and his voice broke. He hadn't said this out loud to anyone, not his sister, not the grief group he'd gone to twice and stopped going to, not the therapist Kate's mother had paid for that he'd ghosted after 3 sessions. He had not said this out loud to any living person in 3 years. "She didn't die right away," he said. "She lived for 4 hours. She was conscious for 2 of them. I got there, and she was conscious, and she was scared, and I held her hand, and I told her I loved her, and I told her I was sorry about the phone. And she said it was okay. She said it was okay, Lila, but I don't know if she meant it or if she was just being her. And I have spent 3 years not knowing. And I have spent 3 years thinking that if I hadn't been such an asshole that morning, she wouldn't have been driving mad. And if she hadn't been driving mad, she would have seen the truck. And if she'd seen the truck, Adrian? No, let me finish. If she'd seen the truck, she'd be here. She'd be in this bed. She'd be the one holding him. And I wouldn't be this. I wouldn't be a man who makes his 6-year-old wait to be cold because his father looks busy." He was crying, finally. He hadn't cried in a long time either. He turned his face away because he didn't want her to see, and also because he did. And that confused him so much he couldn't look at her. Leela didn't move from her spot by the stove. She didn't come over. She didn't put a hand on him. She had the decency, or the sense, or the gentleness to let him cry from across the room. "She meant it," Lila said quietly. "You didn't know her." "I know people who love people don't use their last conscious words to lie to them. She meant it." Adrian pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes. "Yeah," he said, rough. "Yeah, maybe." The wind screamed against the window. The pipe downstairs dripped into whatever it was dripping into. The camp stove hissed its small blue hiss. Mason turned over in his sleep and murmured something and settled again. "Adrian." "Yeah." "We're going to get through tonight." "Yeah. And tomorrow I'm going to help you figure out what's next, okay? Not because I owe you, because I want to." He looked at her finally. Really looked at her, the way he had almost looked at her in the hallway hours ago. She was 26 years old and exhausted and wearing his flannel, and she had just fixed his broken pipe in the dark and listened to him say things he had never said out loud, and she was still somehow offering him more. "Why?" he said. "I told you. Your house is where I stopped." "That's not an answer either. It's the one I have." He almost smiled. Okay. He lay back down next to his son. He kept his hand on Mason's back. He watched the blue light flicker on the ceiling, on the corners of the room, on the chair where Kate's paperback still sat, on the woman on the floor in his flannel with her damp hair and her haunted eyes. Somewhere past 3 in the morning, he thought he heard her breathing go slow and even. And he realized she had finally fallen asleep, and he realized, with a kind of dull, strange wonder, that he was glad she was there. He was glad she was there. He hadn't been glad about anything, about anyone, for 3 years. The wind kept howling, the house kept groaning, the temperature kept dropping. Somewhere in Culver's Ridge, people were waiting out the storm in basements and living rooms, and the news had said at least one church community hall on the edge of town that had been opened as a shelter for anyone who could reach it. Adrian thought about the old woman 2 houses down, Mrs. Halloran, 78, widowed, living alone, who once every 2 weeks came over with a pie because she had nobody else to give pies to. He thought about how her porch light had been on when he'd last looked out the kitchen window at 7. He wondered if it was on now. He wondered if anyone was keeping her warm. He closed his eyes. He would think about Mrs. Halloran in the morning. He would think about a lot of things in the morning. For now, there was his son's breathing under his hand, and the blue hiss of the stove, and the soft breathing of the woman on the floor, and the storm that had broken the power in the pipes, and Adrian thought, maybe something in him that had been frozen so long he had stopped noticing it was frozen at all. He kept his hand on his son's back. He listened to all 3 of them breathe, and for the first time in a very long time, Adrian Cole, who had buried his wife 3 winters ago and had been buried with her in every way that mattered since, let himself feel, in the dark, one small thing he couldn't quite name yet. Something that wasn't grief and wasn't guilt and wasn't fear. Something closer, maybe, to not being alone. Morning came without announcing itself. There was no sunrise, not really. The sky just slid from black to a bruised gray, and the storm kept doing what the storm had been doing all night, which was erasing things. Adrian woke up because Mason's elbow was in his ribs, and because the air in the room had the particular stillness of a place where a small fire had gone out. He opened his eyes and looked at the camp stove in the doorway and saw that the blue flame was gone. Lila, she was already awake. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, exactly where she'd been at 2 in the morning, except now she had the second propane canister in her lap, and she was turning it over in her hands like she was trying to figure out how much was left by weight. It died about 20 minutes ago, she said quietly. I wanted to let you sleep. How long have you been awake? A while. Lila. A couple hours. He sat up. Every bone in his body complained. His back, which had been bad since he'd thrown it out, lifting a transmission at the shop 8 years ago, made a sound he didn't like. The cold had gotten into his joints and taken up residence there. How's the canister? Half, maybe. I don't want to use it unless we have to. If we burn through both of them before the power comes back, we've got nothing. Yeah. He looked down at Mason. The boy's cheeks were pink, which was good. His breathing was even, which was better. Adrian put his palm on his son's forehead and felt, for the first time all night, warmth that wasn't borrowed. He made it, Lila said. Yeah. You did too. Adrian didn't answer that. He swung his legs off the bed and put his feet on the floor and felt the cold come right through the socks he'd slept in. He stood up too fast and had to grab the bedpost for a second while his head decided what it wanted to do. When did you eat? Lila asked. What? When did you last eat something? He thought about it. He'd had half a sandwich at the shop around 11 the morning before, when his mechanic Ray had brought him a Cuban from the deli and stood over him until he'd eaten part of it. He'd thrown the rest in the break room trash. Yesterday, I guess. I'm going to heat some water. There's instant oatmeal in my room. I have like 6 packets. You don't have to share your... Adrian. Yeah. Stop. He looked at her. She was exhausted. Her hair was flat on one side from sleeping sitting up. His flannel was still on her, and it looked in the gray morning light even bigger on her than it had at 2 in the morning. She looked like a person who had been running for 4 years and had finally been allowed to sit down. Okay, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me for oatmeal. I'll thank you for whatever I want. Something almost like a smile passed across her face and was gone so fast he wasn't sure he'd seen it. I'll make coffee if I can figure out the filter situation, she said. You have a French press? Kate had one. Where is it? Cupboard above the stove, left side. She got up slowly, the way people get up when they've been on a cold floor for 8 hours. Her knees cracked. She made a face at them, like they'd personally offended her, and then she took the dead canister off the stove and went downstairs with it. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and listened to her moving around in his kitchen. It was a sound he hadn't heard in 3 years. Not a bad sound, just one he'd forgotten was a sound. Mason woke up slow. He woke up the way he always did, by burrowing deeper into the blankets first and pretending not to be awake, and then by suddenly sitting up all at once like a cartoon character noticing something. "Dad?" "Morning, bud." "The power come back?" "Not yet." "Is Lila still here?" "She's downstairs making oatmeal." "Good." Adrian looked at him. "Good?" "Yeah." Mason rubbed his eyes with both fists. "She's nicer when she's not hiding." "What do you mean hiding?" "She always goes in her room fast, like a mouse. I told Rylan at school she was like a mouse." "Who's Rylan?" "My friend. The one with the scar." Right. The scar one." Mason yawned and reached for him. Adrian pulled the boy into his lap and felt, with a stupid gratitude, how warm he was. Fever was the wrong kind of warm, and cold was the wrong kind of cold. And regular warm was a thing a father could stop worrying about for 10 seconds. "Dad." "Yeah." "Is Mrs. Halloran cold?" Adrian went still. "What made you think of her?" "Her porch is yellow, and ours is yellow, and ours was broken last night. So hers is probably broken too." "Yeah," Adrian said slowly. "Yeah, she probably is cold, Maze. You should go check." "I will, after oatmeal." "Before." "Maze." "Before, Dad. She's old." Adrian looked down at his son's serious little face, at the sleep creases on his cheek, at Kate's gray-green eyes looking up at him without blinking, and he felt, for the second time in 12 hours, that hard, ugly thing in his chest that happened when Mason said something a better man would have said first. "Okay," Adrian said. "Before." Downstairs, Lila had gotten a fire going in the wood stove in the living room. Adrian stopped in the doorway and stared at it. He hadn't used that stove in 2 winters. It had been Kate's project. She'd pushed him to install it the first fall they lived in the house, back before Mason, back when they were still the kind of young couple who said things like, "We should be more self-sufficient," and meant it. After Kate died, Adrian had kept meaning to clean the flue. He had not cleaned the flue. He had not even looked at the stove. He had walked past it twice a day for 3 years and looked through it like it was furniture in someone else's house. Leela was crouched in front of it with a poker in her hand, adjusting a log. "You got it going?" She glanced up. The flue was open. You had dry wood stacked on the back porch under a tarp. I checked the chimney cap from the upstairs window with binoculars. It's clear. You had binoculars. Birdwatching. You birdwatch. I used to. She said it the way people say I used to smoke. Lila. Yeah. The stove is great, thank you. The pipes are done in the bathroom. I'm sorry. I went down to look at the shutoff again and there's water on the basement floor. Not much, but enough. Whatever broke, it broke before I got to the valve. Yeah, that was going to happen either way. Insurance? Probably. I'll call when the lines come back. If the lines come back. They'll come back. You sound sure. I'm not sure. I'm just sure enough for both of us right now. He looked at her across the room. She had rolled up the sleeves of his flannel, and she had a smudge of soot on her jaw from the stove, and she was, Adrian noticed with the kind of detachment a man uses when he's trying not to notice, pretty in a way he had somehow managed not to see for 4 months. Not magazine pretty. Not the kind of pretty that announced itself. The kind of pretty that sneaked up on you when you weren't paying attention, which he hadn't been, which was his own fault. He shook himself. Maze wants me to go check on Mrs. Halloran. Lila stood up. The lady 2 doors down? Yeah, I'll come. You don't have to, Adrian, we talked about this. Right. Eat the oatmeal first. Yes, ma'am. The oatmeal was terrible and wonderful. It was the kind of instant oatmeal that came with too much brown sugar and too little substance, but it was hot, and it was food, and Adrian ate his sitting on the living room floor in front of the stove with Mason curled up against his side. Lila sat cross-legged on the other side of the stove with her bowl in her lap. None of them talked much. The storm outside had eased from a scream to a moan, but it was still coming down hard, and the windows were still white, and the world outside the house was still, essentially, gone. How old is Mrs. Halloran? Lila asked. 78, 79 maybe. I keep forgetting. Alone? Her husband died before Mason was born. Her son's in Phoenix. He comes out twice a year. Does she have a generator? She has a kerosene heater she forgets to fill. Her son got it for her 2 Christmases ago. I know because he sent me $50 to help her set it up, and I forgot to do it until March. Adrian? I know. You set it up in March, though. I set it up in April. I'm not a saint. Lila almost smiled again. She did that thing where her mouth went up on one side and her eyes didn't quite commit. What? Adrian said. Nothing. I've just never heard you say that many words in a row. That's so. Yeah. I'll try to dial it back. Don't. He looked at her over Mason's head. She held his eyes for a beat longer than she ever had before, and then she looked down at her bowl, and the moment, whatever it had been, closed. Okay, Adrian said. Let's go get her. Getting dressed to go outside took 20 minutes, which in a normal winter would have taken 2. Adrian layered Mason up in long johns, 2 pairs of socks, snow pants, a turtleneck, a fleece, and the blue down jacket Kate's mother had sent last Christmas, along with a balaclava that made the boy look like a very small bank robber. Then he went to work on himself. Base layer, thermal shirt, second thermal shirt, wool socks, insulated bibs, the Carhartt coat that was older than his marriage had been. He wrapped a scarf around his neck twice and pulled a beanie low over his ears. Lila came down from upstairs in her own layers. She had a navy parka that was too big for her. He had never seen it before, and it occurred to him he'd never seen her winter clothes at all, because when she'd moved in, it had still been warm. Her boots were work boots, scuffed and worn, not the kind of boots a woman buys for looks. He filed that away. You have goggles? He asked. No. Take Kate's. Top shelf of the coat closet, the green ones. She hesitated. Lila. I don't want to. They're goggles. They don't have feelings. Put them on. She got them. She put them on. They fit her because Kate had had a small face and Lila had a small face, and Adrian looked at her in Kate's ski goggles and Kate's green hat, which he hadn't even seen her take, and his chest did that thing again, the one he kept not examining, and he looked away fast. Dad. Yeah, bud. Can I come? No. But, Maze, no. You stay by the stove. You keep adding wood the way Lila showed you. Small pieces, not big ones. We'll be back in half an hour. What if you're not? Adrian crouched down so he was at Mason's eye level. I will be. But what if? Mace. Dad? Adrian held his son's face between his gloved hands. Mason Cole. Listen to me. I will be back in half an hour, and Lila will be back with me, and then we will all eat something that isn't oatmeal. Deal? Mason's lower lip wobbled. He nodded. Deal. Love you. Love you. Adrian stood up. He pulled the balaclava over Mason's head so just his eyes showed, kissed the forehead through the fabric, and stood back up. Let's go, he said to Lila. The snow was past their knees on the front walk and past their waists by the time they got to the street. The wind, even reduced, felt like somebody slapping him in the face with a wet towel. Adrian had trudged through a lot of Iowa snow in his life, had shoveled it, plowed it, gotten stuck in it, cursed it, but there was something different about walking through snow when you knew the power was out and nobody was coming to plow the road for hours yet. The silence of it. No trucks in the distance, no dogs barking. Just the wind and the squeak of his own boots, and Lila breathing beside him through the scarf she'd pulled up over her mouth. Mrs. Halloran's house was 2 doors down, which under normal circumstances was 40 seconds of walking. It took them 15 minutes. Halfway there, Lila went down. Lila, I'm fine. Your leg went somewhere. I'm fine, Adrian. I'm up. Go. He watched her pull herself out of the drift. The drift had swallowed her to the hip. She didn't complain. She didn't swear. She got her leg back under herself, planted her boot, and came on. He'd known men who would have cried in that drift. He filed that away too. Mrs. Halloran's porch light, of course, was off. Her porch itself was half buried. The screen door was bowed outward from the weight of the snow against it, and the main door behind it was the dark kind of dark that told you there were no candles lit inside. Adrian pounded on the door. Mrs. Halloran! It's Adrian from down the street. Nothing. Mrs. Halloran! Lila came up beside him. The door locked? He tried the knob. It turned. He looked at Lila. She looked at him. She never locks it, he said. She's 90% sure the Lord is going to protect her from burglars, and 10% sure she's going to fall in the kitchen and need someone to be able to come in and find her. Lila nodded. She didn't say anything about that. Something in his language maybe had caught her, and she let it go. Mrs. Halloran, Adrian called again, pushing the door open. It's Adrian. I'm coming in. The inside of the house was colder than the outside, which was the worst thing a house could be. It meant the cold had been there for a while. It meant no fire, no stove, no heat of any kind, for hours. Mrs. Halloran? A thin voice from the back. In here. They followed it. Through the front hall with the framed embroideries on the walls and the runner rug that smelled like cedar. Through the kitchen with the yellow linoleum and the dish drying rack. To the back of the house, to the small den where Ellen Halloran was sitting in her recliner under 3 quilts with a flashlight in her lap and a novel in her hand, and her breath making small white clouds in front of her face. Oh, she said, squinting up at them. Oh, it's Adrian, and I don't know you. This is Lila, Adrian said. She lives with me. Mrs. Halloran's eyebrows went up. Does she? Not like that. Mrs. Halloran, it's too cold in here. I know it, honey. I've been working my way up to getting out of the chair. How long have you been in the chair? Since last night. Lila and Adrian looked at each other. Have you eaten? Lila asked. I had some crackers. When? Yesterday. Supper. Mrs. Halloran, don't start, honey. My son calls every hour to start. I don't need 2 of you starting. Adrian knelt down in front of her and took her hands. Her hands were the worst thing. Her hands were like holding frozen birds. Ellen, she blinked at him. It had been 3 years since he'd called her by her first name. He didn't know why he did it now. Ellen, you can't stay here. We're taking you to our place. We have a wood stove going and Mason is there and it's warm. You can't stay here. My son said to stay. Your son is in Phoenix. That's what I told him. Ellen. Okay, she said. Okay, Adrian. Okay. 1. Getting her out of the house took almost an hour. She couldn't walk far in the snow, and they didn't have a sled, and at one point Adrian seriously considered calling Ray at the shop on a phone that had no service to ask if he had any ideas. In the end, it was Lila who solved it. She went out to the garage on the side of the house and came back 10 minutes later dragging a child's plastic sled, bright red, the kind that was meant for a grandchild who only visited in the summer. It was on a shelf, she said. Bless you, said Mrs. Halloran. They bundled Ellen Halloran into her own parka and her own boots, and 2 of her own quilts, and a knitted hat that had been her husband's. Adrian carried her out to the sled. She weighed nothing. She apologized the whole time because that was what women of her generation did when they needed help. Apologized and apologized and apologized. And Adrian told her to stop apologizing and she didn't stop. Ellen, stop. I'm just sorry, honey. I know, stop. They pulled her through the snow. Lila on one side of the sled, Adrian on the other, each with a rope. Ellen sat in the sled with her quilts wrapped around her and her eyes closed against the wind. And halfway back to Adrian's house, she said, to nobody in particular, My Harold pulled me on a sled once, 1961. I slipped on the ice coming out of the hardware store and turned my ankle, and he pulled me a quarter-mile home. Did he? Adrian said, to keep her talking, because keeping an old person talking in the cold was the thing you did. He did. Was strong like an ox. I missed him every day for 40 years, and I miss him today. I'm sorry, Ellen. Don't be sorry. It's a good thing. Missing someone that long means something. Adrian didn't answer. He kept pulling the rope. He felt Lila glance at him across the sled, and he didn't look back. They were almost to his porch when Ellen suddenly said, Did you bury Kate in the green dress? He stopped walking. Ellen, because she'd have wanted the green dress. I remember her in it at the church potluck that summer. She looked like springtime. Yeah, Adrian said, and his voice came out strange. Yeah, Ellen, the green dress. Good, Ellen said, and closed her eyes again. Good. They pulled her the last 20 feet without talking. Mason met them at the door with his snow boots on the wrong feet. Dad, the fire went down a lot, but I put 2 logs on it, small ones, like she said. Good job, bud. Mrs. Halloran, are you cold? Hello, Mason, honey. Yes, I am cold. I was about to ask if you had hot chocolate. I think we have hot chocolate. We do, Lila said from behind Adrian. I saw it in the pantry. I'll heat water. They got Ellen into the house, onto the couch, under the Afghan Adrian's mother had crocheted. She shook for a long time, and then she stopped shaking, and she drank the hot chocolate Lila made her, and she closed her eyes again. And around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she fell into the kind of deep, hard sleep that old people fall into when they've been on the edge of something and somebody pulled them back. Adrian stood over her for a minute, watching her breathe, making sure her breathing was what it should be. He was aware of Lila watching him from the kitchen doorway. When he came into the kitchen, she was washing out the mug. You scared me, he said quietly. She looked up. When? When you went down in the drift, I thought, for a second I thought, I know. Yeah. Adrian. Yeah. You're allowed to be scared about people. He didn't have anything to say to that. He stood in the doorway of his own kitchen in his thermal shirt with his hair damp from the snow. And he looked at a 26-year-old woman in his flannel washing a coffee mug in his sink. And he thought about how he had not been in a kitchen with a woman who wasn't his sister in 3 years. And about how this one particular woman had spent the morning getting soot on her face and pulling an old lady home in a sled. And about how the thing in his chest was not just a thing anymore, it was a thing with an outline. He cleared his throat. Lila. Yeah. I'm going to say something and I'd like you to not answer it today. She turned off the tap. She didn't turn around. Okay. I don't know what this is. I don't know what's happening with me right now. I don't want you to think I'm Adrian. Let me finish. Okay. I'm not making a pass at you. I'm not that stupid. I just wanted to say out loud once that you being here matters, that it has mattered, since last night and since this morning and all of it. I don't know what to do with that yet, but I didn't want the sun to go down again on me pretending I didn't notice. He waited. She didn't turn around. She stood at the sink with her hands on the edge of it and her shoulders very still. Okay, she said finally. Okay? You said not to answer today. I'm answering okay. That's all you're getting. He almost laughed. He almost didn't know why he almost laughed. He walked back into the living room and sat down on the floor in front of the wood stove, and Mason came and sat in his lap, and Mrs. Halloran snored gently on the couch, and outside the storm was finally beginning to lose its mind about whatever it had had its mind made up about. So the second wave of the storm hit at 4 in the afternoon. They had been expecting it, because the radio Lila had upstairs, a wind-up emergency radio she'd had in a drawer and hadn't mentioned because she hadn't mentioned a lot of things, had said the second wave was coming. But expecting a thing and living through it were two different businesses. Around 4, the wind picked up again. The temperature dropped another 5 degrees, and the house started making those sounds again. The knuckle crack of freezing pipes and the low groan of old wood bending against cold it hadn't been designed for. Ellen Halloran woke up around 5 and said she needed her heart medication, which was in her house, and Adrian said he would go. I'll go with you, Lila said. No. Adrian. No, Lila. I need you here. If the fire goes out with Ellen here and Mason here, we have 2 cold people and a very cold kid. You stay. Keep the fire. I know where her pills are. I helped her organize the cabinet in April when I set up the heater. Which took you until April. Exactly. I remember because I'm guilty about it. Let me go. She didn't like it. He could see her not liking it, but she nodded. She didn't fight him. She was not, he was learning, a woman who fought for the sake of fighting. 20 minutes, she said. 15. 20. If you're not back in 20, I'm coming. You can't leave them. I'll wake Ellen. She can hold Mason by the fire. Lila. 20 minutes, Adrian. Fine. He went. He bundled up. He kissed Mason on the top of the head. He didn't look at Lila before he went out the door because he didn't want to, and he didn't know why he didn't want to, and he was tired of examining things. He made it to Ellen's house in 8 minutes because he had broken a trail earlier and the trail was mostly still there. He found her pills on the kitchen counter and the orange weekly organizer with the tiny compartments, the kind of organizer that was a monument to growing old alone. He grabbed the whole thing. He grabbed a bottle of her nitroglycerin from the cabinet too, just in case, and a framed photo of her husband off the mantel, because something in him said she was going to want to see his face if she woke up scared. He was at her back door, on the way out, when he heard the dog. It was a thin sound, not a bark, a whimper maybe, coming from somewhere behind Ellen's house, from the direction of the Pattersons' place. Adrian froze. The Pattersons were a family of 4 or 5. He kept not being sure. They'd moved in 2 summers ago. The father worked at the ethanol plant. They had a dog, Adrian remembered now, a brown mutt they'd adopted from the shelter, and every time he drove past their house in the summer, the dog was in the front yard on a rope and the kids were running around it. He listened again. Another whimper. A weak one. "Don't!" said the part of his brain that had kept him alive for 3 years by keeping him small. "Don't! You have a kid. You have an old lady. You have a stranger in your house waiting 20 minutes. Don't!" He looked at his watch. He had spent 9 minutes already. He had 11 left before Lila came out in the storm looking for him. He looked in the direction of the whimper. "Oh, damn it," he said out loud. He went. The Pattersons' house was dark. Not power-out dark. Nobody home dark. There was no car in the driveway and no prints in the snow except the ones slowly getting filled in. They had evacuated. Somewhere in the last 18 hours, they had gotten out. Maybe to family. Maybe to the shelter at the church hall that the radio had mentioned. And they had left the dog. Not on the rope, at least. The rope was coiled on the porch. But they had left him. Adrian could see him through the glass of the side door. A brown shape curled in the kitchen, on a pile of blankets that someone had at least had the decency to throw down. The dog lifted his head when he saw Adrian. His tail moved once, twice, a slow thump. Adrian tried the door. Locked. He tried the front door. Locked. He stood on the porch with his gloved hands on his hips and thought about his options and didn't like any of them. Then he took the butt of his flashlight and broke the kitchen window. The glass was old and it gave easy. He reached through, careful of the edges, and flipped the latch. He got the window up. He got himself through the window, which was not easy, because he was a big man in a big coat, and he landed on the kitchen floor on his hip in a way that was going to cost him later. The dog whimpered again. "Hey, buddy, hey, easy." He crawled over. The dog was bigger up close than he'd looked through the window, maybe 60 pounds. Some kind of lab mix with long ears and gray around the muzzle. He was old. Older than the kids in the yard had made him look. And he was weak. His water bowl was empty. His food bowl was empty. He was lying on the blankets because he couldn't get up. Adrian put his hand on the dog's side. He felt ribs. He felt the dog's heart going fast and thin. "Okay, pal," he said. "Okay. We're going to figure this out." He looked around the kitchen. There was a counter. There was a half-finished cup of coffee on it from yesterday, frozen solid. There was a note on the fridge in a child's handwriting. "By Rusty, we love you." And Adrian read it, and his throat did something he did not have time for. Rusty, right. Rusty, come on. He got his arms under the dog. The dog let him. The dog was past protesting. Adrian stood up with 60 pounds of old lab in his arms and realized he was going to have to go back out through the front door, which was locked from the inside, which meant unlocking it with one hand while holding the dog, and also that he had burned through probably 6 minutes inside this house and was now seriously behind schedule. Lila was going to kill him. Lila was going to come out in the storm and kill him. He got the door open. He got out on the porch. He stood there with Rusty in his arms and the wind hitting him, and the snow coming down harder than it had come down all afternoon. And he thought about the walk back, and he thought about his watch. And he thought about Mason, who had asked, "What if you're not?" and believed him when he said, "I will be." "Okay, Rusty," he said out loud. "We're going to do this fast." He went. But Lila was on the porch when he came up the walk. She had her parka on. She had Kate's green goggles pushed up on her forehead. She had a broom in her hand. Not as a weapon, just as something to hold, which was what a person did when a person didn't know what to do with their hands. And she was standing on the porch with the door cracked behind her, and she was watching down the street for him. And the moment she saw him, she made a sound he couldn't quite hear over the wind. "You're 24 minutes," she said when he got close. "You said 20. You're 24. I know." "Adrian, I know, Lila. I'm sorry. Is that a—" "It's a dog. It's a dog. It's the Pattersons' dog. They left him. The house is empty. He was going to die." She stared at him. "Come inside. Come inside right now." "Yeah. Right now." I am. She held the door open. He went in. He stood in his own foyer with a half-dead dog in his arms and snow melting off him onto the floor, and Mason, who had been on the rug in front of the stove, stood up and said, with the enormous dignity of a 6-year-old, "Dad, you got a dog." "I got a dog." "Whose dog?" "His name is Rusty. He was alone. I'll explain later." "Can we keep him?" "Mace? Can we keep him?" "We'll see." Ellen Halloran, from the couch, said, "Oh, that's Florence Patterson's dog. Florence Patterson left 3 days ago to stay with her sister in Des Moines. She must have thought someone in the family was coming to get him." "Well," Adrian said, setting Rusty down on the rug in front of the stove as close to the heat as he dared without cooking the dog. "Nobody came." "Nobody came," Ellen agreed. "That's a shame." "Yeah." Lila was already moving. She went into the kitchen and came back with a bowl of water. She set it down in front of Rusty's nose. Rusty lifted his head 6 inches, got his tongue into the bowl, and drank like he hadn't drunk in a week, which he probably hadn't, or close enough. "Easy," Lila said softly, putting her hand on his shoulder. "Easy, pal. Slow." Rusty drank slower. Adrian sat down on the floor next to them. He didn't take off his coat. He just sat. He was aware of Mason crowding in against his side, and of Ellen on the couch with her organizer of pills in her lap, and of Lila crouched over the dog with her hand gentle on its fur, and of the fire doing what fires did, and of the storm outside doing what the storm was doing. "Adrian," Lila said, not looking up. "Yeah. Don't ever do that again." "Do what?" "Come back 4 minutes late and don't tell me why." "Yeah, okay." "I mean it. I know you mean it. Okay." She looked up at him finally. Her eyes were shiny, not crying shiny, something else, something he was going to have to think about later when he had the capacity. "I found something while you were gone," she said, "in the basement. I went looking for an extension cord. There's a crawl space behind the water heater. Adrian, there's a kerosene heater back there, a good one, big, with 3 full cans of fuel next to it. That's not mine. I know it's not yours." "Kate," he said. "Yeah, probably." "She didn't tell me." "Of course she didn't tell you. She was storing it for a day like today." He closed his eyes for a second. "That sounds like her." "Yeah? Yeah, that's exactly the thing she'd do. She used to hoard bottled water. We used to fight about it. I called her paranoid, and then he stopped. And then she died, and I remembered every single fight I'd called her paranoid about." "Adrian, I know. It's fine. Yeah, that sounds like her." He opened his eyes. Lila was watching him. Mason was watching him. Even Ellen, from the couch, was watching him, in the way old women watch a grown man coming apart in small increments. "So," Adrian said, clearing his throat, "so we have heat, real heat, if we need it." "We have heat? Okay. You found the thing," he said. "That was the thing we needed, and you found it. I got lucky." "You didn't get lucky. You went looking." She didn't answer that. Adrian looked down at the dog, who had fallen asleep with his chin on Lila's boot. He looked at his son, who had his small, cold hand on the dog's ear, already claiming it. He looked at Ellen Halloran, who had fallen half asleep again with the organizer in her lap. He looked at the fire, and then he looked at Lila. She was still crouched there on the rug, one hand on the dog, her hair coming loose from the knot she'd put it in, soot on her jaw and melting snow on her shoulders, and a stranger's flannel under her own parka. And she was looking back at him the way she had looked at him in the doorway of the kitchen at 2 a.m. When she'd said, "It's already weird. I just didn't want to make it worse." He said quietly, so Mason wouldn't hear, I didn't understand what you were doing here. For 4 months, I didn't understand. She said quietly back, I didn't either. And now? Now I'm holding your dog. He laughed. He actually laughed, a short, startled sound that came out of him without his permission. Ellen opened her eyes briefly and said, About time, and closed them again. And Adrian didn't know what she meant by that. And also, he realized, he did. The second wave of the storm got worse all evening. They set up the kerosene heater in the middle of the living room with the window cracked for venting. It threw heat like a small sun. They moved Ellen's couch closer. They made a nest of blankets on the rug for Mason and Rusty, and Mason fell asleep before 7 with one arm around the dog's neck and the dog's chin on his stomach, and neither of them moved for 3 hours. Adrian went upstairs at some point to get a book. He stood in his own bedroom in the dark and looked at Kate's paperback on her chair, and for the first time in 3 years he picked it up. The bookmark was a card she'd made herself out of pressed flowers and lamination tape. He ran his finger over it. He put the book in his coat pocket. When he came back downstairs, Lila was sitting on the floor by the heater with her back against the couch. Ellen was asleep sitting up, the way old women slept when they didn't trust being lying down. Mason was snoring softly into Rusty's fur. Hey, Adrian said quietly. Hey! He sat down next to Lila, not touching, close enough that their shoulders were in the same warm pool of air. What were you upstairs for? He pulled the paperback out of his pocket. Her book. I picked it up. Lila looked at the book. She didn't reach for it. What was she reading? A mystery. I don't remember the title. She read a lot of mysteries. She said detective novels were calming. Were they? For her, yeah. Not for you? I never read them. I read like tractor manuals. She smiled. A real one this time. Adrian. Yeah. Thanks for not making me eat dinner alone tonight. We haven't had dinner. That's a word for it. He looked at her sideways. She was looking at the heater. The orange light washed across her jaw and made her look younger and older at the same time, the way firelight does to people. Lila. Yeah. This is the longest conversation we've had in 4 months. I know. I'm sorry it took this long. It didn't take this long. You weren't ready. There's a difference. He was quiet for a while. Will you still be here after this? When it's over? When the power comes back? When Ellen goes home and Rusty? I don't know. When Rusty figures out whose dog he is now? Will you still be here? She looked down at her hands in her lap. She said, Do you want me to be? He watched his son breathe. He watched Ellen breathe. He watched the dog breathe. He listened to the storm do whatever the storm was doing outside, and he thought about the paperback in his coat pocket and the pressed flowers in the bookmark and the woman in his flannel sitting next to him. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I think I do. She didn't answer right away. She picked at a loose thread on the cuff of the flannel. She took a breath like she was about to say something and then let it out again. Okay, she said finally. Okay? You said not to answer today. That was this morning. Same day. Lila. Tomorrow, Adrian. Okay? Okay. The fire popped. The heater hissed softly. Somewhere upstairs, a pipe made a small, sad sound of giving up. Outside, the wind was shifting, the way Iowa wind shifted when a storm was finally getting ready to let go. It wasn't done yet. It had a lot of damage left to do, to the house and to the town, and to the road the plows were going to take 2 more days to clear. But sitting there on the floor in front of the kerosene heater, with a borrowed dog and an old neighbor and a sleeping son and a woman, he was just beginning to actually see. Adrian let himself feel, for the first time since Kate had left for the store 3 winters ago, the small and unfamiliar shape of tomorrow. Not hope, exactly. He wasn't brave enough for hope yet. But something like the room where hope might eventually come to live. He closed his eyes. He didn't mean to sleep. He slept anyway. And when Lila, sometime after midnight, pulled a blanket up over his shoulders without waking him, he didn't know she'd done it, but he slept warmer the rest of the night because of it. He woke up to the smell of something burning, and for a second, in the bleary space before his brain caught up to itself, he thought the house was on fire. It wasn't. It was toast. Lila had found the cast iron pan and was making something that had gotten away from her on the kerosene heater, and she was standing over it in his flannel with a dish towel in one hand, cursing softly in a way he hadn't heard her curse before. Damn it, damn it, damn it, damn it. Adrian sat up. The blanket she had pulled over him at some point in the night slid into his lap. He looked at it for a second, at the plaid wool one that had been on the back of the couch for years, and then he looked at her. What are you doing? Breakfast. On the heater. You got a better idea? Maybe. Then I'm open. He got up. Every joint told him about it. He went over and looked at the pan. It had 2 slices of bread in it, both of them black on one side and raw on the other, and a third slice that had given up entirely and was now part of the pan. Yeah, that's dead, he said. I know it's dead, Adrian. Thank you. There's a stove in the garage, propane, the camping one, the 2-burner. I used it for turkey frying in the yard. It's bigger than yours. Lila stared at him. You have had a turkey fryer stove this whole time. Yeah. In the garage. Yeah. Adrian Cole. I know. I have been melting snow on a 1-burner backpacking stove for... I know, Lila. I have been... I forgot it was there until right this second. You forgot. I haven't been in the garage since November. I don't go in there. Kate used to organize it after she... I stopped going in there. Lila's mouth closed. The anger in her face slid down into something gentler, the way anger did in people who had been grieving themselves. Oh, she said. Yeah. Okay, well, go get it. I'll go get it. And take Rusty out. He's been holding it since 4 in the morning and he keeps looking at me. How do you know he's been holding it since 4 in the morning? Because he got up and went to the door, and I took him out. And it was snowing sideways, and he took 3 steps onto the porch and turned around and said no. He said no. In dog. Adrian looked at the dog, who was lying by the heater with his chin on Mason's foot and looking at Adrian with the patient, exhausted eyes of a 60-pound animal who had been a person's dog for a long time and had just started being someone else's. All right, Rusty, let's go. The dog got up slowly, the way old dogs got up, in segments. He stretched. He shook himself. He waited by the door. The garage was colder than it had any right to be because it wasn't insulated for weather like this, and the snow had banked up against the side door so high that Adrian had to put his shoulder into it to get the door to open. He went in with a flashlight. Everything was exactly where Kate had left it. Her snow shovels hung in order of size on the pegboard. Her husband's tools, which had been his grandfather's tools, in the red rolling chest. Her label maker on the workbench, because Kate had labeled everything. Every drawer, every bin, every shelf, in her small, tidy handwriting. Extension cords, Christmas, Halloween, emergency. Adrian stood in the middle of the garage in his dead wife's labeling system, and he had to wait out a minute before he could move. The stove was on the shelf above the workbench, right where he'd left it on Thanksgiving 2 years ago. He got it down. He got the propane tank out from the bin labeled grill fuel. He checked the tank by shaking it and heard sloshing, which was what he wanted to hear. On his way out, Rusty having done his business against the side of the shed, Adrian saw, on a shelf near the door, a plastic tub labeled in Kate's handwriting, Mason, 5 and up. He stopped. The tub was dusty. It had been sitting there for 4 years since Kate had set it up, probably, thinking ahead the way Kate had thought ahead about everything. He pulled it down. He opened the lid. The inside was a set of kid-sized cross-country skis, a snow saucer, a sled harness for a dog, still in its packaging, a pair of small mittens with reindeer on them, new, tags on, and taped to the inside of the lid a note in Kate's handwriting, which he would have known in the dark. For Mace, when he's big enough. Don't wait too long to use this stuff, Aid. Winters are short and kids are only small once. He held onto the side of the shelf with his free hand for a minute. Then he closed the tub. He left it on the shelf. He carried the stove and the tank back to the house. He did not tell Lila about the tub, not because he was hiding it from her. He just needed to carry it alone for a while first, the way you carry certain things alone before you can carry them with anyone else. Tea. The propane stove changed everything. By 8 o'clock, they had real coffee, real eggs, and real bacon, because it turned out Kate had kept a freezer in the basement that had stayed cold enough through the outage to preserve. and Adrian had dragged a package of bacon up from it the night before, and Lila had wrapped it in a dish towel with a jar of snow to keep it cold. Ellen Halloran woke up to the smell of bacon and said, "Oh, praise," which was the closest thing to a prayer Adrian would hear her say that day. And Mason woke up 10 seconds later with the awful instinct of children everywhere and came padding out of the blanket nest in one sock. Rusty came with him, already a unit. "Bacon," Mason said, stunned, the way children get stunned by bacon. "Bacon," Adrian confirmed. "Is the power back?" "No, Bud, but we have a better stove now." "Why didn't we have the better stove yesterday?" "Because your dad's an idiot." "He's not an idiot," Lila said, without looking up from the pan. "He was grieving." She said it matter-of-factly, like she was passing the salt, like it was a fact about the weather. Adrian, who had been reaching for the coffee, stopped reaching for the coffee. Mason, who was 6 and missed nothing, looked from his dad to Lila and back to his dad. "What's grieving?" he asked. "It means missing someone a lot," Lila said quietly. "For a long time." "Oh." Mason thought about that. "Like Mom." "Like Mom," Lila said. "Okay." That was it. That was the whole conversation. Mason sat down on the rug with his sock on and his other foot bare and accepted a piece of bacon from the pan with the cool aplomb of a man at a diner, and Rusty lay down next to him and did not beg, because Rusty had been someone's dog for too long to beg. And Ellen on the couch accepted a plate from Lila and said, "This is a civilized thing. This is a civilized thing you're doing." Adrian sat down on the floor next to Lila. He said very quietly, "Thank you." She said without looking at him, "For what?" "For saying it like that, to him." "It's what it is. Yeah." "You want eggs?" "I want eggs." She gave him eggs. Piche. By noon, the second wave of the storm had blown itself out. The wind dropped. The snow slowed and then stopped. Not all at once, but the way snow stops, in slower and slower flakes until you looked up and realized the sky wasn't falling anymore. It was just sitting there. The clouds began to break in strips. A single weak slice of sun came through the kitchen window around 12:30 and hit the countertop, and Mason stared at it like he had never seen sunlight before. "Dad, Dad, the sun." "Yeah, Bud. The sun came back." "Yeah." "Does that mean the power?" "No." "Oh." But it meant something. It meant Adrian knew that the crews were going to start moving. Iowa Public Power and the county and the city. Trucks. It meant Culver's Ridge was about to wake up out of its 2-day burial and start counting its losses. He went to the front window and looked out and saw, about a quarter-mile down the road, the first yellow flash of a plow. One plow. One blade scraping at a road that was going to take a day to clear. "Lila." "Yeah." "Plows are out." She came to the window. She stood beside him and looked. They were close enough that he could smell the coffee on her breath and the smoke on her hair from the stove. And he didn't step away from her, and she didn't step away from him. And for a long second, they both stood there, and it was the first standing close to another adult moment Adrian had had in 3 years, and it made him feel like he was 16. "That's good," she said. "Yeah." "That's really good." "Yeah." "Adrian?" "Yeah." "After, when they clear the road, Ellen's going to want to go home." "Yeah." "And her son is going to want her to go somewhere that isn't alone." "Yeah, I know." "And the Pattersons are probably going to come back for Rusty." "Probably." "And the power is going to come back on. Eventually." "And then what?" He didn't answer. He watched the plow crawl up the road. It was the Sikorsky kid driving. He could tell by the way the plow rode. Too high, scraping in patches. The way a boy drove when his dad had given him the plow that morning for the first time. Adrian had learned to plow from his own father that same way. Too high, scraping, his dad in the passenger seat telling him to drop the damn blade. "And then we figure it out," he said. "That's your plan." "That's my plan." "That's not a plan, Adrian." "I know it's not a plan." She didn't say anything for a minute. She kept looking out the window. Her breath fogged the glass. "Okay," she said. "Okay? I can work with that." He laughed, just a small one. She almost laughed back. Almost. The doorbell rang at 1:15. It startled everyone because the doorbell hadn't been working since October, and Adrian had assumed it was broken forever, and also because nobody rings a doorbell in a blizzard. Adrian went to the door with Rusty at his hip, already doing the low growl of a dog who was working out, fast, which humans were his and which weren't. Through the frost on the glass, he saw a big shape in a Carhartt jacket. Ray. He opened the door. "You alive?" Ray said. "Yeah."
Kid alive. Yeah.
"Power?" "No." "Thought so. Saw no lights. Came to check." Ray Vasquez had been Adrian's lead mechanic for 11 years. Ray was 56 and built like a refrigerator and had buried 2 wives himself, one to cancer and one, more recently, to a stroke. And Ray had been the only person in town who had kept coming around after Kate died without making a production of it. Ray brought meals. Ray sat in silence. Ray said almost nothing. Adrian had never thanked him for any of it because he didn't know how, and Ray had never asked to be thanked because he didn't need to be. "Come in, Ray." "Nah, I got the truck running. Road's half open. I'm going around. Who needs what?" "Ellen Halloran's here. She needs her house checked. Pipe's probably broke. Her son's in Phoenix." "I'll swing by. Anything else?" "Patterson's evacuated. Left their dog. He's here. He's okay." "Oh, hell. I'll call Florence. She's at her sister's in Des Moines. I got the number." "There's a kid a block over, the Reese kid, on oxygen. He's on a tank, but I don't know how much he's got left. I'll check on him." "Ray? What? Are you okay?" Ray looked at him. Ray had a face like a piece of tanned leather and eyes that didn't give much. "I'm fine, boss. House has a generator. Had a generator since Maria. I know how to ride out a storm." "Ray? Adrian. Yeah." "You got company." It wasn't a question. Ray had seen Lila standing behind him in the hall with a dish towel in her hand through the crack in the door. "I got my tenant." "Uh-huh." "Ray, I didn't say anything." "You were going to." "I wasn't going to say anything, Adrian. I was going to observe, in silence, that you are standing in your doorway after 2 days with no power, and your son is fed, and your neighbor is fed, and your tenant is fed, and you don't look like a man who has been alone for 2 days. I was going to observe that silently, and now I've observed it out loud. You can fire me Monday." "Ray, take care, boss." And Ray was back in his truck and back up the road before Adrian could figure out a good answer. Adrian closed the door. He stood with his hand on the knob for a second. "Who was that?" Lila said from behind him. "Ray, my guy at the shop. He knew you. He's known me a long time. He had opinions. He had opinions. About me. Everyone's going to have opinions about you, Lila, starting today. That's a thing you should know." She was quiet. "Why?" "Because this is Culver's Ridge, and I'm the guy whose wife died 3 years ago, and I haven't so much as had a woman over for dinner since, and now there's a woman in my house, and a storm just happened, and people are going to talk. Okay? Yeah. Are you telling me to—" No, Lila. I'm telling you so you're not surprised." "Okay. Are you surprised?" "No." "Are you upset?" "No." "Lila, I knew what this was going to look like when I decided to stay, Adrian. I decided anyway." She said it without drama. She said it while wiping her hands on the dish towel and walking back toward the kitchen, and Adrian stood in the foyer with his hand still on the doorknob and watched her go, and he thought, very clearly, for the first time in a long time, I could love this woman if I let myself. He locked the door. He didn't say that out loud. He was not, yet, brave enough to say that out loud. Ellen's son called at 3. The phones had come back briefly, a flickering signal that let 2 texts through and then cut out again. One of the texts was from Ellen's son, Gerald, in Phoenix, asking if his mother was alive, and the other was from Adrian's sister, Denise, who lived in Cedar Rapids and was climbing the walls. "Tell him I'm alive and I'm eating eggs," Ellen said when Adrian read her the text. Adrian typed back with cold fingers. "Mom is at my house, power out but safe, eating. We'll keep you posted." He got no response. The signal was gone again by the time he pressed send. He didn't know if the text went through. Denise's message was, "Adrian, if you don't answer me in 30 seconds, I'm driving to Culver's Ridge." He typed, "Alive? Mason alive, tenant alive, power out. Neighbor here, stop threatening to drive. He got, tenant? He didn't answer that one. Then the signal cut out entirely, and he put the phone back on the counter, and Lila said without looking up, your sister. Yeah. Is she coming? If the road's open and she thinks I'm being weird on text, yes. Am I a thing she's going to want to be weird about? She found you the room, Lila. She's going to have opinions about this that would make Ray look relaxed. Oh. She's a good person. She just has opinions. Yeah. Okay. By 4, Ellen was napping again on the couch. Mason was on the floor teaching Rusty the word sit with increasingly imaginative hand gestures, and the house was beginning to warm up in the genuine way, not the just around the heater way, because the kerosene heater had been running all day, and the propane stove had been running on and off, and the wood stove was going steady, and 3 heat sources in a closed-up house eventually do the math. Adrian got Lila alone in the kitchen. Come with me, he said. Where? Outside. Adrian, just to the porch. I need to not be in the house for 10 minutes. She looked at him. Whatever she saw in his face, she didn't argue. She got her coat. They stood on the back porch, which had been sheltered from the worst of the wind and had less snow on it than the front, and they looked out across the yard. The yard was unrecognizable. The swing set Adrian had put up when Mason was 3 was nearly buried, just the tops of the A-frame legs showing. The fence on the far side had a whole section down, buckled under the weight of a drift. A cardinal, of all things, a single red cardinal, bright as a Christmas card, was sitting on the corner post of the fence, looking at the world with the disbelief of a small bird who had survived something it shouldn't have. Look at that, Lila said softly. Yeah. They don't fly in storms. No, they don't. So it rode it out in a tree somewhere. Guess so. They stood there. Adrian had Kate's paperback in his coat pocket, and he had something else in there too, which he had gone up to the bedroom to get while Lila was washing the dishes. He put his hand on it. He didn't take it out yet. Lila. Yeah. I want to tell you the rest of it. The rest of what? The rest of Kate. She turned her head to look at him. She didn't say anything. She just waited. I told you about the fight, he said, about the phone, about the truck, about the 4 hours. I didn't tell you the rest of it. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Okay. She was pregnant. Lila didn't react right away. Her breath made a small white cloud. She watched it dissipate. She said carefully, When? When she died. She was 11 weeks. We told my sister, and that was it. We were going to tell Mason when she hit the 2nd trimester. She had told me that morning that she had an appointment at 4. The ultrasound, that's where she was going. To the hospital. She was going to stop at the store on the way because the appointment was an hour and she wanted to get home to make Mason's dinner before. That's why she was on the county road. That's why she was in a hurry. That's why the fight about the phone mattered, because I'd said, you're going too many places today. You don't need to stop at the store, get home to our kid. And she said, I'm an adult, Adrian. I can manage my own afternoon. And I said, you're not thinking straight. And she said, that is a wild thing to say to a pregnant woman. And his voice cracked. He stopped. Lila didn't move. She didn't reach for him. She stood next to him in the cold and let him have the silence. I said, maybe the pregnancy's making you stupid. He had never said that sentence out loud to another living person. He had barely even said it to himself. He stared at the cardinal on the fence post because he could not look at Lila and he could not look at the ground, and he had to look at something. That was the last thing I said to her before she left. Maybe the pregnancy's making you stupid. She laughed. She actually laughed. She said, yeah, maybe it is. She kissed Mason. She didn't kiss me. She left. 4 hours later, she was in a ditch with a truck on top of her car, and the baby died on impact, and Kate lived 4 hours, and I got there, and I held her hand, and I told her I loved her, and he couldn't finish. I didn't tell her I was sorry for what I said. I told her I was sorry about the phone, about the stupid phone thing. I didn't tell her I was sorry for calling her stupid for being pregnant, because I was too much of a coward to bring up the baby when she was dying, because I thought she was going to live. I thought I had time. I thought the next morning I was going to wake up and apologize for the real thing. And then she stopped breathing around 7. And then the doctor came in and he stopped. And the baby was already gone. And Kate was already gone. And I never told her I was sorry about the baby. And I never will. The cardinal on the fence flicked its tail and flew, a small red punctuation mark across the white yard. Adrian watched it go. Adrian, Lila said. Yeah. She knew. Don't. She knew. You don't know her, Lila. I know women. That's not. I know women, Adrian. I was a woman raised by a woman who got left by a man who didn't apologize. I know the difference between a man who doesn't love you and a man who is too scared to apologize in a hospital. Kate knew the difference too. He couldn't look at her. He couldn't look at her. She knew you loved her, Lila said. She knew the baby was loved. She knew the whole thing. She was scared and she was dying, and she forgave you for a stupid thing you said because she was done with stupid things, Adrian. She wanted the last thing to be love, and you gave her that. You held her hand. You said you loved her. That was the message. That was the one she took. I don't know her. You're right. I don't know her. I know what dying women take with them, though. They take love. They don't take the fight you had in the kitchen. He was crying, full crying now, not the careful kind. His shoulders were shaking. He put his forehead against the porch post because he couldn't stand up straight. Lila put her hand on the middle of his back. That was all. Flat of her palm, between his shoulder blades. She didn't rub circles. She didn't murmur things. She just put her hand on his back and left it there and let him come apart in the cold. He cried a long time. He cried until the cardinal came back to the fence post and went again. He cried until his face felt stiff from the cold on wet skin. He cried until the thing he had been carrying for 3 years, the thing he had slept next to and eaten next to and raised a boy next to without ever once setting it down, got lighter. Not gone. He knew it would never be gone, but lighter by the weight of one honest sentence said out loud to another human being who didn't flinch. When he could talk again, he said raw, she'd have been 11. If the baby had lived, if the pregnancy had lived, she'd be 3 right now. She? We didn't know, but she was a she. I don't know how I know. I just know. Okay? I named her anyway. In my head. I never said it out loud. You don't have to say it out loud. Her name was Nora. The name came out of him like something being pulled from a deep place. He hadn't said it, the shape of it, in 3 years. Not to Kate, because Kate had died before they could name her. Not to Mason, because Mason hadn't known. Not to Denise, not to the therapist, not to the bathroom mirror. Nora. Her name was Nora. Lila didn't say anything for a second. Then she said very gently, "Hi, Nora." Something in Adrian broke that he hadn't known was still intact. He turned and pulled her against him, and Lila, who had been very careful for 4 months not to touch him and not to be touched by him, let herself be held. She wrapped her arms around his back under the coat. She let him cry into her shoulder. She didn't say anything else. She just held on while he cried, and her cheek was against his neck, and her hair was against his jaw. And she was warm. She was so warm, he couldn't get over how warm another person could be after 2 days in a cold house. They stood there in the yard with the cardinal on the fence and the buried swing set and the downed fence. And Adrian, for the first time in his adult life, let himself be held by a woman without feeling like a failure for needing it. When they came back inside, Ellen pretended to be asleep, which meant she had seen them through the back window and was being gracious about it. Mason did not pretend. Mason looked up from Rusty and looked at his father, whose face was wet and red, and looked at Lila, whose cheeks were also wet, and looked back at his dad. "Dad? Yeah, bud. Were you crying?" "Yeah, bud. About Mom?" "Yeah, bud." "Okay? Okay?" Lila said grieving. "So you were grieving?" "Yeah. Yeah, I was." Mason nodded once, the grave nod of a child accepting an explanation that was on the level. Then he went back to trying to get Rusty to sit. Rusty, who had been ignoring Mason for 20 minutes, chose that moment to sit, and Mason lit up like the power had come back on in his face. "Lila! Lila! He sat!" "I saw. Good job, Rusty. Good job, Rusty." Adrian stood in the doorway of his own living room and looked at his son and his son's dog and his old neighbor pretending to sleep, and the woman who had just let him name his dead daughter out loud. And he felt, maybe for the first time since the hospital, something close to clean. Not healed. He didn't think you got healed, but cleaner, like the storm had taken something out of him that had been rotting. The power came back on at 7:42 that night. It came back on the way power always does, all at once, without warning. The lamps flickered, the refrigerator coughed, the furnace gave its long, heavy groan of waking up, and Mason, who had been almost asleep on the rug, sat bolt upright and screamed, "Power!" Rusty barked once, offended by the yelling. Ellen opened her eyes and said, "Oh, thank the Lord, I have to pee."
Lila laughed. It was a real laugh, the first full one Adrian had heard out of her, and it changed her whole face. He stood in the middle of the room, and he turned slowly in a circle, and he watched the house come back to life. The clock on the microwave started blinking 12, 12, 12. The hallway lamp came on warm and yellow. The sound of the furnace, a sound he had not registered as a sound for years, because you never registered the sound of a furnace until it was gone, filled the house. "Okay," he said. "Okay, that's enough. We're out of the woods." "We are not out of the woods," Lila said. "Your pipes are broken, your bathroom is destroyed, there's a lab on your rug that might be permanently yours, there's a 78-year-old woman on your couch who shouldn't be alone tonight, and your sister is going to drive up from Cedar Rapids in about 12 hours, and you have to explain all of this." "Okay," Adrian said. "We are less deep in the woods." "Less deep in the woods," she agreed. Ray came back around 8 with Florence Patterson on speakerphone. "Adrian, hi, I'm so sorry. I thought my brother-in-law was coming. He said he was coming, and then the roads and—" "Florence, he's fine." "You have him?" "I have him." Oh, you are a saint, Adrian Cole. You are a saint." "I'm not a saint, Florence. My son already wants to keep him." A pause on the line. "Does he?" "Yeah. Well, yeah." "Adrian, honest truth, we were going to have to rehome him in the spring. He's 13. He doesn't do stairs anymore, and we're moving to Des Moines in April, and the apartment's on the 2nd floor." "Florence, just think about it. That's all I'm saying." "I'll think about it." "Thank you. I mean it. I'm sorry about the window." "Don't worry about the window. I'll pay for the window." "Florence, I'll pay for the window." "Okay." He hung up. Ray was standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand. "You adopting a dog, boss?" "Looks like." "Huh." "Ray." "Yeah." "Ellen shouldn't be alone tonight. Her house is going to take days. Can you take her to the Methodist shelter, or—" "I already called her sister in Ottumwa. Sister's son is driving up in the morning to get her." "Ray?" "What?" "Thank you." Ray put his hat back on. "You're going to be okay, boss." "Yeah. You. You specifically. I've been watching you for 3 years. You're going to be okay." Adrian didn't trust himself to answer. Ray nodded, like that was an answer, and left. Ellen fell asleep early that night in the guest bed Lila made up for her with fresh sheets, in what had been Kate's sewing room and had been empty for 3 years. It was the first time someone had slept in that bed since Kate's mother had visited the month before the accident. Adrian stood in the doorway for a second after Ellen was tucked in, and he looked at the old woman in the bed and the quilt over her, and the small glass of water Lila had put on the nightstand, and he realized the house had just, that evening, started to be a house that had people in it again. Mason went to bed in his own room for the first time in 2 nights. Rusty went up with him. Adrian didn't argue about the dog on the bed. He would argue tomorrow. Tonight, the dog had earned it. When he came back downstairs, Lila was on the couch by the wood stove, which was still going even though the furnace was running because neither of them had thought to put it out yet. She had her knees drawn up. She had Kate's paperback on her lap. She hadn't opened it. She was just holding it. Adrian sat down on the other end of the couch. They didn't talk for a minute. Then Lila said, "You told me the rest of it." "Yeah." "Nora." "Yeah." "Thank you." "For what?" "For telling me. For not carrying that alone anymore, at least for today. I might pick it up again tomorrow." "I know. Old habits." "I know." He looked at her. "Lila." "Yeah." "What's your rest of it?" She looked at the stove. My rest of it, she said. Yeah. It's not as big as yours. It doesn't have to be. She was quiet a long time. My mother died in May of 2022, she said finally. I was home from school for the weekend. She'd been sick for a year and a half, cancer, the kind that didn't respond to anything. I was her only kid. My dad had left when I was 11, and I didn't know where he was, and I didn't care. She and we were each other's whole people. When she was sick, I thought I was handling it. I was studying for my nursing boards. I was making casseroles. I was keeping a schedule of her meds. I was being good. Yeah. The weekend she died, I got home on a Friday. She was tired, but she was okay. We watched a movie. She fell asleep in her chair. I woke up Saturday morning, and she was still in the chair. She'd died in the chair in the night. Adrian closed his eyes. Lila, I should have made her go to bed. That's what I thought for a long time. If I'd made her go to bed, I'd have heard her in the night. I'd have known. I don't know. I was 22. I thought I could have saved her by making her go to bed. You couldn't have. I know that now. Yeah, but I didn't know it then. And I didn't take my boards. I dropped out of school. I sold her house for less than it was worth because I couldn't stand being in it. I moved to a town where nobody knew me, and then I moved to another one, and then to another one, and I worked at diners and bars because diners and bars were the places you could get hired without a degree in anything. And I slept with a couple of guys I shouldn't have, and I didn't call anyone who loved my mother because every single one of them wanted to talk about her and I couldn't, and I disappeared. For 4 years I disappeared. And then your sister offered me a room, and I took it, and I moved in. And for 4 months I've been in your house being very careful not to exist, because I didn't know how to exist anymore. Adrian was quiet. I was going to leave in the spring, she said. I decided in October. I was going to give you notice March 1st and be out by April. I had enough saved to get to Colorado. I don't know why Colorado. It was just a place I hadn't been. You're not leaving in April. I wasn't planning to stay, Adrian. You're not leaving in April. She turned her head to look at him. Are you telling me or asking me? I'm asking you. Okay? Will you stay? She looked at the paperback in her lap. She looked at the stove. She looked at the ceiling. Can I think about it? Yeah. Until tomorrow. Until whenever you need. Thank you. Lila? Yeah. Take your board. What? Take your nursing boards. Adrian. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying it out loud because I think if nobody has said it out loud to you in 4 years, then it needs to be said out loud. Take your boards. You're 26. That's nothing. Take your boards. I can't afford. I'll pay for them. Adrian. I mean it. I'll pay for them. Think of it as rent in reverse. I'm not going to let you pay for my. Okay, I'll loan you the money then. Whatever. Take your boards. Leela, take your boards. She put her hands over her face. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. She sat there with her hands over her face for a minute, and he didn't say anything else, and the stove popped, and somewhere in the house the furnace cycled on again with its big, gentle sound. When she lowered her hands, her eyes were wet. She looked at him the way she had looked at him on the porch, which was not the way she had looked at him ever before, which was with her whole face. Okay, she said. Okay, what? Okay, I'll take them. Good. Don't celebrate yet. I haven't opened a textbook in 4 years. I might fail. Then you'll take them again. Adrian. Lila. Okay. Okay. He leaned back on the couch. She pulled the blanket up over both of their feet, hers and his, without making a thing of it. The blanket covered both pairs of feet like a small claim. They sat like that for a long time, not touching, feet under the same blanket. The stove burning low, the house warm, the storm over. Outside, the plows were working. Adrian could hear them in the distance, the steady grind of yellow trucks doing the long, slow work of digging a town back out of what had happened to it. In the morning, the sky would be clear and the sun would be blinding off the snow. In the morning, Ray's wife's nephew would come pick up Ellen and take her to Ottumwa. In the morning, Florence Patterson would call again about the dog. In the morning, Adrian's sister would drive up from Cedar Rapids like a one-woman weather event and ask Lila questions that Lila did not owe her answers to,
And Adrian would sit between them and learn, for the first time in a long time, how to defend the shape of his own house. But that was morning. Tonight, there was a woman on his couch with her feet under his blanket, and his son asleep upstairs with a dog on his feet, and an old woman asleep in the sewing room, and a house that had heat, and a man who had, after 3 years of being a ghost in his own life, spoken his daughter's name out loud. Adrian closed his eyes. "Lila," he said, without opening them. "Yeah." "You still in my flannel?" "Yeah." "Keep it." She laughed. A small one. The second real one he'd ever heard. "Okay, Adrian." "Okay." The stove popped one more time and settled. The wind, finally, had gone somewhere else to be wind. The house, for the first time in a long time, was only quiet, not empty. And Adrian, who had started this storm believing his only job was to keep his son alive until morning, fell asleep on his own couch next to a woman whose name 3 days ago he had barely used, and he slept, and he did not dream. And when the furnace cycled on again around 2 in the morning, nobody was awake to hear it. Denise Cole Hartman arrived at 11:40 the next morning in a white Subaru that had gotten, judging by the mud up to the door handles, through roads that were not yet officially open. Adrian heard her before he saw her. Denise was 2 years older than him and had been announcing her arrival to rooms since 1988. She got out of the Subaru in snow boots and a red parka and carried a casserole dish up the walk with the solemn focus of a woman transporting a bomb. "Mason," she called through the door before she even knocked. Adrian opened it. "Hi, Denise." "Hi, Adrian. Where's my nephew? Where's my favorite living person? Where is he?" "Kitchen. He's feeding a dog." "A what?" "Dog, long story." She walked past him with the casserole and set it on the counter and hugged Mason before she even took her coat off. Mason, whose policy on his aunt was that she was too loud but smelled good, submitted to being hugged. "You got bigger," Denise said. "I'm 6. You got taller." "I'm still 6. "Fine. You got taller while being 6. "Whose dog?" "His name is Rusty, and he was alone and Dad broke a window. Your father broke a window. To get the dog." Denise turned and looked at her brother. Adrian was in the kitchen doorway with a coffee mug. He gave her a small salute with it. "Coffee?" he said. "Please." He poured. He handed her the mug. Denise took one sip and then, over the rim, looked past him into the living room where Lila was folding a blanket on the couch with the careful attention of a person who was pretending not to be listening. Denise lowered the mug. "Hi," she said. Lila straightened up. "Hi. I'm Denise. I remember." "Of course you do. I handed you the key." "Yeah." "How was the storm?" "It was a storm." "Uh-huh." Adrian cleared his throat. "Denise, the cinnamon rolls in the car still warm." "Don't manage me." "I'm asking about cinnamon rolls." "You are absolutely managing me, Adrian. I'm allowed to say hi." "You said hi." "I said hi and one follow-up question." "You're on your second follow-up." Denise set the mug down on the counter, turned fully, and looked at Lila. "I'm not going to make this weird," she said, in the tone of a woman who was deciding, in real time, not to make it weird. "Okay," Lila said. "I just want to say, out loud, in this kitchen, with witnesses, Denise, Adrian, shut up, that I'm glad you were here." Lila blinked. "What?" "I'm glad you were here. In the storm. With him. With Mason. I called this house 6 times from Friday to Sunday, and I couldn't get through. And the only thing that kept me from driving up the ditch on Route 6 was knowing there was a second adult in that house who had, in my brief and limited experience, a head on her shoulders. So, I'm glad you were here. That's all. That's the whole speech." Lila looked at her. "Oh," she said, "that's the whole speech." "Okay. I do have follow-up questions, but they can wait." "Okay." Denise picked her mug back up and took another sip and added, without looking at anyone in particular, "Some of them will wait until after the casserole." "Denise, Adrian, I brought a casserole. Let me have this." The casserole was chicken and rice, because that was the casserole Denise had been bringing Adrian for 3 years, ever since Kate died, and it had become a kind of grammar between them. She appeared with it, he ate it, they did not discuss whether it was a good casserole, and nobody asked her to stop. Ellen Halloran ate 2 helpings. She had been up since 8, sitting on the couch with her organizer of pills and her husband's photograph, waiting on the nephew from Ottawa, who was supposed to come at noon. The nephew was running late, the roads. The nephew texted, the roads. And Ellen was being patient about it, in the weary way old women were patient about things. Mason ate 3 helpings, because Mason ate everything Aunt Denise made. Lila ate a small one and kept her head down, and answered Denise's questions when Denise asked them and didn't volunteer anything, and Adrian watched the 2 of them from across the table and thought about the shape of his own life in a way he hadn't thought about it in 3 years. "So," Denise said, mid-bite, "nursing." Lila looked up. "What?" "Adrian said you were going back for nursing." Lila looked at Adrian. Adrian, who had mentioned this to Denise in a 2-line text that morning, discovered that Denise was going to go ahead and bring it up at lunch. "Denise." "What?" "She hasn't told anyone else yet." "Well, I'm not anyone else." "Denise, it's okay," Lila said. Yeah, I'm going back, I think. I'm going to take the boards." Denise nodded slowly, chewing. "Culver's Ridge General takes new RNs. My friend Mavis is the nurse manager on the medical floor. I can put you in touch." "Denise?" "What, Adrian?" "You are 8 minutes in the door." And this is a lot." Lila set her fork down. "It's okay," she said quietly to Adrian. Then, to Denise, I'd take that introduction. Thank you. I'll send you Mavis tomorrow." "Okay." And Denise said, still casually, still chewing, "If you need a place to study, the back room at my house is empty since Jeremy went to college. No rent, no expectations, just a quiet room with a desk." Lila looked at her. "Why would you offer me that?" "Because 26 is young and 4 years is nothing, and I like people who show up in storms." Lila didn't answer that. She picked her fork back up. Adrian watched her. He saw the thing his sister was doing, and he saw that he was going to owe Denise for it later. And he also saw, which was worse, that Denise had offered Lila a life raft that had nothing to do with him. A way to be a person in this town that was not Adrian's tenant or the woman from the storm. A study room. A nurse manager named Mavis. A back door that opened without going through his house. It was the kindest thing his sister had ever done for another woman in front of him. He looked down at his plate. The nephew from Ottawa arrived at 1:15. He was a big, quiet man in his 50s named Dale, and he apologized 6 times for being late before Ellen told him to shut up and hug her. "Ellen," Adrian said, while Dale was putting her bag in the truck, "call me when you get there." "I will. And I'll come by your house this week. I'll check the pipes. I'll get someone out to look at the heater." Adrian, "Yeah, thank you, honey." "Ellen." "What?" "You're not alone. I want you to know that." Ellen looked up at him. Her eyes were still the color they had been when he was 9 years old, and she had caught him stealing apples off her tree, which was a color he knew by heart. "I know," she said. "I've known that for a long time, Adrian. It's you I wasn't sure about." He had no answer for that. She patted his cheek. Her hand was warm for the first time in 2 days. "Take care of that girl," she said, quietly enough that Dale wouldn't hear. "She's been running a while. She's tired." "I know. Don't mess it up." "Ellen, I mean it. Don't mess it up." He didn't promise. He didn't not promise. He helped her into the truck and shut the door and watched Dale drive away slow over the rutted snow. And he stood on his porch in his flannel with his breath hanging in front of him, and he thought about the shape of the word mess for a long minute before he went back inside. Florence Patterson came for Rusty at 3. She came alone because her husband was still in Des Moines with the truck, and she had borrowed her sister's car, which was not a car for snow, and she had white-knuckled the drive down. She stood in Adrian's foyer in her coat and did not take her coat off and watched Rusty lying on the rug with his chin on Mason's thigh. "Oh," she said. "Yeah," Adrian said. "Oh, Adrian." "Yeah." Yeah. Florence started crying. She did it quietly, the way she did everything. Florence had been a kindergarten teacher at the elementary for 20 years and was a person who could cry in front of you without making it anyone else's job. "He won't last another year," she said. "He's 13. Our place in Des Moines is stairs. The vet said, 'Florence, it's okay.'" It's not Florence. He's okay here. Mason loves him. We have room. We have a yard. He glanced at Mason. We want to keep him, if that's what you want. Florence looked at Mason, who had not looked up from the dog, who was pretending with the grave seriousness of a 6-year-old not to be listening. What do you think, Mason? She said gently. Mason looked up. I love him a lot, he said. Yeah, I'd take care of him. I'd feed him and walk him. And if he dies, I'd be really sad, but it would be okay because he'd be my dog when he died. Florence put her hand over her mouth. Okay, she said, behind her fingers. Okay. She left the leash and a bag of kibble and a tag with Rusty's name and her old number on it, which Adrian said he'd replace, and she kissed the top of the dog's head for a long time, and Rusty, to his credit, licked her cheek once and then lay back down because his hip hurt. When she was gone, Mason looked up at Adrian. Dad. Yeah, bud. He's ours. Yeah, bud. For real. For real. Okay? That was it. That was the whole ceremony. Rusty sighed, deep and content. The sigh of an old dog who had decided the rug was his. Denise stayed until 4. She washed the casserole dish by hand because Denise didn't believe in putting Pyrex in the dishwasher, and while she washed, Lila dried, and Adrian stood in the doorway of his own kitchen with his hands in his pockets and watched the two women work around each other like they had been doing it a long time. Lila, Denise said, not looking up from the sink. Yeah. Adrian is a hard man to love. Denise, Adrian, go check on Mason. Denise, go check on Mason. He didn't go. But he took a step back from the doorway, so he was technically not in the kitchen, which was the compromise Denise had been accepting from him since they were children. He's hard to love, Denise said again, handing Lila the rinsed dish. He's quiet, and he thinks, and he holds on to things. And when Kate died, he got smaller. He got smaller for 3 years. He stopped calling. He stopped coming to my kids' birthdays. He stopped answering my mother when she called. And my mother had to die in April of 2023 without her son having called her back for 4 months. I'm not telling you this to make him look bad. Denise, Adrian started, I'm telling you this because I want you to know it's not you. I want you to know that whatever he does next, whatever he manages to do or fails to do, it's not going to be about you. It's going to be about the fact that he has been frozen since February of 2023, and he is, I think, starting to thaw, and thawing hurts. It hurts the thing thawing, and it hurts the people standing next to it. Lila dried the dish slowly. Okay, she said. I'm not warning you off. I don't want you to think that. I watched him cook you an egg this morning, and I almost cried into my coffee. I'm not warning you off. Okay. I'm just saying, it's going to hurt. I know. You know? I've been thawing too. Denise stopped washing. She looked at Lila for a long second. Something in her face softened into something Adrian had not seen on his sister's face in years. Oh, honey, she said. Don't. Oh, honey. Denise, please. Okay. I'm done. The dish is dry. Denise dried her hands on the towel and turned around, and Adrian, pretending he hadn't been listening, walked into the kitchen and reached past his sister for a glass, and Denise hip-checked him gently on her way to the coffee pot. I'll be back Sunday, Denise said, pouring the last of the coffee into a travel mug. With groceries. I'm not asking, Adrian. I'm telling. Okay. And Lila. Yeah, my number's on the fridge, Mavis, room, whatever, whenever. Okay? Okay. Denise zipped her coat. She kissed Mason on the top of the head. She gave Adrian a long, assessing look that had in it, he thought, a little of his mother, a little of his grandmother, and a lot of his own regret. Adrian. Yeah. Don't be an idiot. I'll try. Try harder than that. Okay. She left. The Subaru cranked. The Subaru reversed out of the drive and was gone down the white road, and the house went quiet in the specific way houses go quiet after Denise had been in them. Lila was still standing in the kitchen with the towel in her hand. She's a lot, Adrian said. She's wonderful. She's both. Yeah. He looked at her. She looked at him. Lila. Yeah. You want to take the room at her house. She set the towel down on the counter slowly, like she was giving herself time to answer carefully. I want to have the option, she said. Okay? That's different from wanting it. Okay. Adrian, listen. I don't want to live out of the same house as the man. She stopped. I don't want to live in the same house as you while we figure out what this is. That's not being careful about gossip. That's being careful about me, about both of us. I need my own address for a while. Do you understand that? He did. He hated it. He understood it. Yeah, he said. I'm not upset. Yeah, Lila. Yeah, take Denise's room. Take the boards. Do all of it. Okay. But, dinner on Sundays here, for as long as you want. Mason and me and you and Rusty. No weirdness about it. Just Sundays. She almost laughed. You're negotiating a standing dinner. I'm negotiating Sundays. Okay. 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 Leela moved out on the following Saturday. It took 2 trips in Ray's truck because Lila had arrived with more than she left with, which was a thing Adrian thought about for a long time after. She left the flannel on a hook in the mudroom, on purpose, because Adrian had told her to keep it, and she had decided privately that keeping it meant coming back for it. She left a book on the coffee table, one of Kate's mysteries, because she had started reading them slowly, one a week, because Adrian had asked her to, with a bookmark on page 41. The last thing she took out of his house was her own pillow. She stood in the foyer with it under her arm and looked at him. Sunday? He said. Sunday. 5. Bring something. Like what? A thing. That's specific. Bring yourself. Bring a thing. Anything. Okay, Adrian. Okay. She almost left without hugging him. She got to the door and she turned and she came back and she put the pillow down on the floor and she hugged him, brief and fierce, the way a person hugs when they have just started learning how to hug again. Then she picked up her pillow and she went out to Ray's truck. And Ray, who had pulled up in front and had been sitting in his truck for 6 minutes pretending to check his phone, started the engine without comment. Adrian stood in his foyer with the door half open and watched them drive off. Rusty came and leaned against his leg. Mason came up next to him with a sock in his hand and one bare foot. She's coming back Sunday, right, Dad? Yeah, bud. Every Sunday? Every Sunday. Forever? Adrian looked down at his son. I hope so, bud. Me too. The first Sunday was awkward. Lila came at 5:04. She had brought a pie because Denise had told her to bring a pie because Denise had opinions about what you brought to Sunday dinners. She sat at the table across from Mason, and she didn't know what to do with her hands, and Adrian didn't know what to do with his face, and they both kept looking at each other and looking away like they were in a middle school cafeteria. Mason, who had been briefed and who was a patient child, finally put his fork down and said, Dad, you should tell her about the new fence. Bud, the fence. Okay, Lila, I'm having the back fence replaced in April, the section that went down. I got a guy. Cool. Yeah. Another silence. Dad, tell her about Rusty's hip. Adrian looked at his son. His son, at 6, was running dinner. Rusty's hip is okay, Adrian said. Vet saw him Thursday. Gave him pills. He's going to be okay for a while. Good, Lila said. Yeah. A third silence. Dad, tell her about... Okay, bud, I got it. Lila, how was the test center? I registered. For when? June. June. Yeah, it's the earliest spot they had. Okay. Mavis said to come shadow her in May, before the boards, just to be in a hospital again, see if I can still stand the smell. Can you? I don't know. If I can't, I'll figure something else out. I don't have to be a nurse. I want to be a nurse because I wanted to be a nurse before I stopped wanting anything, and I want to see if that want is still in there. Okay? Yeah. The fourth silence was not awkward. It was just a silence. Adrian reached across the table and put his hand, palm up, next to her plate. She looked at his hand for a long second. Then she put her fingers in his fingers. Mason, from his side of the table, said, with the satisfaction of a 6-year-old who had been managing grown-ups successfully for 12 minutes. Good. Now can we have pie? The weeks that followed were not smooth. Adrian had never been a man who did anything smooth, and he wasn't going to start for this. There was a Tuesday when he didn't call her for 2 days because he was in a mood he couldn't name, and Lila, who had her own 4 years of muscle memory for disappearing, didn't call him either. And by Thursday night, she was sitting in Denise's back room staring at the phone and not touching it. And Denise, who had eyes on everything, walked in with 2 mugs of tea and said, "Call him, honey." And Lila said, "I don't want to be the one who calls." And Denise said, "He's not Kate. He's not going to die if you call him first. Call him." And Lila called him. And Adrian picked up on the second ring and said, "Hey." And Lila said, "Hey." And he said, "I'm sorry. I've been weird." And she said, "I know, it's okay." And he said, "No, it's not okay. I should have." And she said, "Adrian, stop. You're allowed to be weird for a day. I just don't want 2 days." And he said, "Fair?" And she said, "Sunday." And he said, "Sunday." There was a Sunday in February when Mason had a nightmare, and Adrian found out at the dinner table, and Lila asked, careful, "What was the nightmare about?" And Mason looked at his plate and said, "Mom?" And Lila looked at Adrian, and Adrian reached for his son, and Lila reached for her napkin, and neither of them tried to fix it, because there was no fixing it. And Mason climbed into Adrian's lap and cried quietly into his collar for 10 minutes. And Lila sat across the table and did not leave the room. Because she was learning, Adrian was learning, that not leaving the room was sometimes the whole thing. There was a Saturday in March when Ray, who had been watching all of this with the patience of a man who had buried 2 wives, said to Adrian in the back of the shop, "Boss, are you going to marry her?" "Ray." "Just asking." "Ray, it's March." "So?" "We've been It's been 4 months since the storm. And 4 months before that she was in your house. That's 8. Ray, I'm not telling you to marry her tomorrow. I'm asking if you're going to." Adrian looked at his friend. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think I am." "Okay." "Not yet." "Okay." "When she passes the boards, when she has her own thing, I don't want her to think, I don't want her to." "I get it, boss. You do." "I do." Ray went back to the lift. Adrian stood in the shop with a wrench in his hand for a long time and did not go back to work for almost 10 minutes because he had just said yes out loud to another human being about a future. And he had not said yes about a future since the morning Kate told him she was pregnant the second time, in their kitchen, at the counter, while the coffee was brewing. And that yes, and this yes did not cancel each other out. They sat in him, both of them, in the same chest, making the same shape, and he realized, standing there with the wrench, that this was what Denise had meant by thawing. It didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying more than one warm thing at a time. Lila passed her boards in June. She called him from her car in the parking lot of the testing center in Des Moines. He was at the shop. Ray handed him the phone. Lila was crying. Hey, what?" "I passed." "Oh." "I passed, Adrian. I passed. Lila, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm sorry. I'm crying. Cry all you want. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you, Lila." "Okay. Come to the house. I'm in Des Moines." "I know you're in Des Moines. Drive back. Come to the house. I'll feed you." "It's Tuesday. I don't come on Tuesdays." "Come on Tuesday." "Okay." She came on Tuesday. She came in her test day clothes, blazer and all, and she came into the house, and Mason tackled her at the knees, and Rusty tried to stand up and couldn't quite. His hips were getting worse, and Lila crouched down and hugged the dog's neck and cried again, because she was allowed to, because she had earned a day of crying about everything at once. Adrian made pasta. Nothing fancy. Pasta with butter, which was what Mason ate. They sat at the table, and Mason told Lila, in incredible detail, about a kid at school named Rylan with a scar and an opinion, and Lila laughed in a way she had not laughed at his table before. After Mason was in bed, Adrian and Lila sat on the back porch in the warm June evening with 2 beers and watched fireflies come up out of the grass that had 5 months earlier been buried under 5 feet of snow.
You remember, he said. Remember what? The cardinal. Yeah.
You said they don't fly in storms.
They don't. But they come out after. They come out after. He looked at her. Lila. Yeah. I wanted to ask you something. She looked at him. She didn't say what because she could see his face.
Not tonight, he said quickly.
I'm not asking tonight. Tonight is yours. I wanted to tell you that I'm going to ask. Soon. And I wanted to say it out loud first, so you wouldn't be surprised. So if you needed to think, so you could. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Adrian. Yeah. I don't need to think. Okay? Ask me whenever you want. Okay? Okay.
He didn't ask her that night. He had a ring in his sock drawer, but he had had a ring in his sock drawer for 6 weeks, and he was not going to pull it out on the night she had passed her boards, because her passing her boards was the biggest thing that had happened to her in 4 years, and he was not going to put himself on top of it. But he took her hand, and she took his hand back, and the fireflies kept coming up, and Rusty came out and lay down on the porch between their chairs, and somewhere in the back of the house, Mason was asleep with his mouth open the way he slept, and Adrian Cole, who 6 months earlier had been a man keeping his son alive until morning in a freezing house, sat on his porch with a woman he was going to ask to marry him, and a son he was going to raise better than he had been raising him, and a dog he had pulled out of a window, and a life he had. Finally, stopped apologizing for surviving.
Lila. Yeah. Thank you. For what? For staying. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. She just squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. And the night went on being a night. And somewhere over the county line a train blew its horn, long and slow and far away, and neither of them moved.
He asked her in August on the back porch, on a Tuesday, with no ring in his pocket because the ring was on the kitchen counter in a coffee mug because he had forgotten it. He laughed at himself and went inside to get it, and Lila laughed too. And when he came back out and knelt down on the porch boards and held it up, she was already crying and already nodding, and all he managed to say was, "Will you?" And all she managed to say was, "Yeah, Adrian, yeah." They were married the following spring, in the backyard, small, with Denise cooking, and Ray giving a toast so short it was almost one sentence, and Mason carrying the ring on a pillow Denise had sewn, and Rusty lying on the grass because he couldn't stand for the whole ceremony anymore. Ellen Halloran came down from Ottawa and wore the green dress she had told Adrian to bury Kate in because she had 2 of them, and she cried through the whole thing and pretended she wasn't. They sold the old house the next year. Adrian thought it would be harder than it was. Kate's sewing room, Kate's chair, Kate's clawfoot tub. He let them go. And he found he could let them go because Kate had never been in the walls. She had been in him, and he could carry her anywhere. The new house was smaller. A porch, a yard, a maple tree that turned red in October. Lila worked nights at Culver's Ridge General and came home at 7 in the morning smelling like antiseptic, and she would climb into bed with her hair still wet from the hospital shower and sleep with her back against Adrian's chest. And Adrian would lie there awake for a while, listening to her breathe, and he would think about the man he had been at 2 in the morning in a freezing bedroom, crying into his dead wife's pillow, and he would not recognize himself, and he would be grateful for it. Rusty died in November of the 2nd year, in his sleep, between the couch and Mason's feet. Mason cried for 3 days and then one night at dinner said, "I'm glad he was our dog at the end." And Adrian cried into his napkin, and Lila reached across the table and held his hand. And Mason, now 7, said, "Dad, it's okay." And it was. Adrian thinks about it sometimes, standing at the kitchen window in the mornings with his coffee. What he thinks is this: people wait for life to give them back what it took, and life mostly doesn't. It gives you something else instead, something you didn't order and didn't expect and didn't think you deserved, and your only job is to be awake enough when it shows up to open the door. He almost didn't open the door. He almost let a quiet woman freeze in a hallway because he was too tired to learn one more name. He almost let his son go cold because he had mistaken grief for duty. He almost drove a plow around his own life for 30 more years. He didn't. Barely. He opened the door, and the rest of it, the fence, the nursing boards, the Sundays, The ring in the coffee mug, the small warm house with the maple tree. The rest of it came walking through.